A blazing, three-eyed, dog-like monster snapped and snarled at the adventuring guild, light of glory, like it wanted them gone. Standing tall like it dares the world to look away. Starting today's story with the guild leader, Claude, long dark hair flowing, urging his crew to strike the creature was the most satisfying thing I could have done. The moment the creature struck, it blasted a fiery breath that could have turned them to dust, until Bobson, the big man, lunged forward and slammed his battle axe down to block it. The roaring flames vanished in a blink, and Bobson practically strutted, until he swore the fire wasn't hot enough. Then he literally felt the bottom of his pants start to burn. Right when the pain hit, the group's priest Carl, a petite guy with glasses, brought a pool of water straight to the spot, snuffing the flames out fast. Suddenly Dorothy, the only woman in the witch guild, snapped her spell into motion. Casitas freezing hell asterisk asterisk. Then a blade-sharp ball of ice erupted out of thin air, blasted the fiery creature through its mouth and body, and pinned it there, right when the chance appeared. Snatching this opening with both hands, Claude snapped his skills into gear, supercharging his black swordsmanship as he launched into the air. He blasted off the creature's body like a springboard, barked the magic words mid-flight, and landed with a brutal slash, cutting the creature's head clean off. He pointed out that even a magical beast stood no chance against him, and once he finished, he calmly slid his sword back into its sheath. Then, from the corner, a voice snapped that Claude had beaten him up. Yet Leonard, the leader of the other guild, didn't even have to glance over to know it was Leonard talking to him. Claude snapped that Leonard was moving way too slow, and Leonard only gave that awkward little grin as he scratched his head. Claude kept talking anyway, trying to soften it with a half-baked explanation, and Leonardo just burst out laughing at the jab. Yet the guild members did not asterisk like seeing Claude glare at their dark-haired man, and they hit boiling point when Claude turned around and said the same thing to their leader. Claude even insisted he wouldn't be shocked if they got outranked by them, and one of Leonard's comrades nearly shouted back, until their leader stepped in fast, promising them at least they'd stomp the monster with zero trouble. After he came back, Claude turned to leave without telling anyone they should be grateful there were no dead around, while he yanked a black-haired man and snatched Fildo Electria, the main character, by the hem of his shirt. Just as Claude and Fildo slipped away, Leonard's other colleagues burst into view, and they couldn't believe it. The kids weren't kids at all, bathed in that party light of glory, and it made everyone stare like, "Wait, were you all holding back this whole time?" Leonard didn't dodge the truth. He was the group's point man, and he definitely hadn't expected Fildo to turn out like that. They also saw Fildo crouched behind a rock while his comrades clashed in front, but Leonard stayed quiet, like the rest of the story would come later. Inside the tavern, the Light of Glory crew was gathered, raising their cups and toasting the next step in their guilt, led in all of it by the magic swordsmen, Claude and Bobson. He also pointed out how their guild had exploded in size, and Carl chimed in that everyone's level had finally hit the top. Then he turned to Dorothy, asking if she felt the same. Dorothy nodded, wondering out loud if any other guilds out there could even stand up to them. As she sipped her drink and slammed it down, Claude jumped into the talk, and suddenly he got it. Their Light of Glory was the real deal, not just a question of level or size. Then Claude teased that Fildo might miss today's celebration. But when they looked closer, one of them snapped that Claude was the one who'd sent their points to the giver, to get him to do the job. Claude turned to Fildo, who was hustling errands for the guild, and there he was, juggling a list as he pushed through a crowded street, until a man nearly got taken out by a runaway crate, and Fildo snapped in at the last second, yanking him to safety, then staring at him with clear worry as he asked, "Are you okay?" What? The man could only thank Fildo. Then it hit him that Fildo was getting persecuted, so when the older guy mocked him, Fildo bolted into the night, determined to prove he could be better. When he finally stumbled into the tavern, his friends tore into him for being late and mocked his pathetic lack of skill. Sure, a few short distances might sound easy, but it feels brutal to them. So they just stayed quiet as the thing they were talking about got hammered with insults, all the while heads down, taking it on the chin. Suddenly Claude snatches him and yanks him in, then fires off. Is Fildo upset? While trying to lift his spirits and bragging that his expertise helps Claude so much. Yet Claude snaps that Fildo shouldn't overthink it, because Fildo's only thinking they should be doing chores, not trading sarcasm while drinking all day. Right then, Dorothy leans in close to his ear and hisses that he's supposed to do the work to get the monster materials back, since they let them slip away. Fildo turns his head with furrowed brows, ready to argue, then shuts up instead. Guild leaders rushed in to stop him, even though they never promised him even a sip of water. Yet Fildo had already told them, "I'll be back," and Dorothy just sneered, clocking how ice-cold the kid's attitude toward her really was. Right as Fildo was about to slip out the room, Claude snapped his name and shoved a tiny scrap of paper into his hands before he could even grab it. Then the guild leader snapped into an explanation. Fildo's money results this quarter were a total letdown, so they slashed expenses left and right, and even though Fildo never asked for help, Dorothy couldn't resist pointing out how nice it was that they still managed to reward him with guild points. He thanked Fildo because with Fildo by their side, their experience shot past double, and even the witch had to admit the light of glory had climbed all the way to #1 in the country. Yet Carl and Bobson still felt like they might not be able to do it. Fildo finally burst back into his room and collapsed in pure, bone-deep exhaustion. He stared at his payslip and zeroed in on the numbers, then dug into the stats from their old quests, only to discover his pay had been slashed, and while his soldier strength got put through the ringer, all he could scrape together afterward was spare change. When he finally took it all in, it hit him like a punch. He'd been basking in the spotlight for years, yet his power never leveled up a single bit. They knew exactly how to wring every last drop of value out of Fildo, because all he could do was pass around and crank up the shared experience for everyone involved, nothing more. So while the guild stacked the front line with battle-ready veterans, Fildo usually stayed back like a secret weapon. Fildo figured he didn't even need a level, but then it hit him. Claude had begged him to join the guild. And just like that, the memory of their leader's promise slammed into his thoughts. Become the biggest, strongest guild in the world. Fildo figured he couldn't stand being around them a second longer, but if the guild's got any luck, they'll smash him to pieces first. The very next day, Fildo froze in place, because when Claude said he wasn't needed anymore, it hit like a punch. When the guildmaster said it again, Claude didn't hesitate. He looked Fildo in the face and told him he wasn't needed anymore, firing him on the spot, dismissing him for now, and even thanking him for everything he'd done. Fildo stood there with his mouth hanging open, trying to argue back that he knew he was low-level, but that he still helped the guild by sharing what he'd learned. Until Dorothy stepped right in front of him, bowed, and cut him off, saying they didn't need his experience anymore. Bobson jumped in too, laughing that their strength was unbeatable now, and that Fildo was nothing but dead weight. They took turns roasting him, talking big about how every guild member had shot up to high levels, then pointed at Fildo and laughed, calling him a deadweight, slowing the whole team down. Even after they called him hopeless as an adventurer, and jabbed salt into the wound by mocking that his magic and sword levels were basically no better than an ordinary guy. They still asked what he'd do once he left. Then another voice cackled and said the real reason his level was so trash was simple. They wouldn't let him fight. Claude and their guild leader announced that every guild member had voted to shove and drive him out, while Fildo just kept quiet, head bowed, voice barely there. Fildo finally dared to ask if this was truly what they wanted, and that question snapped Claude's attention before he launched into more bites. The former point giver practically yelled, demanding, right between narrowed eyes, if they were absolutely sure he should leave, and that sharp pause hit before Bobson, Carl, and Dorothy burst into laughter. The older man bowed to Fildo and said they'd been showing their disinterest in him for ages, but instead of talking to him, Fildo strode up to Claude's table, and right now she was staring face to face with the president of the fellowship. Fildo shot another question. Do you want me out? Warning that if he pulled back all the know-how he'd gained, the whole guild would feel it, but Claude didn't flinch, and the older man looked pissed as he snapped again. They weren't a social club, and they didn't tolerate anyone who wasn't useful, leaving a discouraged Fildo trying to argue that leaving wouldn't just hit the four of them, it would shake the entire guild. Claude finally snapped. He shoved Fildo out the front door with a violent burst. Claude's taunt hit like a slap as his hand clapped roughly onto Fildo's back, sneering that he was just some lowly adventurer. The other three crowded the doorway too, Dorothy scolding Fildo not to dream of any severance pay, while Claude, furious, whipped a broadsword at him like, "You're useless now." Still, they pushed on, laughing anyway, because when the door slammed shut in Fildo's face, one of his friends mocked him for speaking the truth. He got stranded out in the freezing snowstorm all alone that night. Fildo yanked out his broadsword, kicked on his skill, and smashed the shared ability with the guild as everything around him splintered and cracked. Fildo leaned in and told Claude, "This is it, our final meeting," then swore he'd keep his word no matter what. He yanked back every bit of the experience he'd handed them, then bolted forward like he had no time to look behind him. Fildo strode into the dark night, sword gripped in his hand, right as a sharp beep blared. His level had just skyrocketed. Next thing you know, they're shoved into a gritty pub, where an old man with a vertical scar over his right eye talks with pure nostalgia about how unbelievably perfect the dragon meat was. Suddenly, he switches gears and becomes a food critic, raving that the meat is thick, rich, and downright succulent. And Fildo, the younger one, can't stop his mouth from watering just from the description alone. While the others shove him aside or tune out, Fildo stays locked in, and even Claude clocks it, telling him that one day, if he becomes an adventurer, he might finally get to taste dragon meat. So for now, Fildo has to keep pushing and do his best. Later, Fildo jolted awake from his sleep, only to realize his dreams were replaying old memories from the past, and even as he yawned, those beeps kept ringing in his ears. The kid even swore that back home, not even his own country's integrity knight commander could match that. Then he stared at his stats and admitted it was hard to believe the experience he handed to every guild member was really that insane, while Filda wondered what would happen if he truly had this much. So maybe he could finally return to everything he'd been giving up, because the quest voice keeps blasting that he's leveling up, and yeah, back to the point. Fildo reckons this is his shot to join the Knight Order, climb the ranks, and make it all pay off. Right from behind, a huge scar-faced man burst into view, laughing his head off at what Fildo just said, like it was the funniest thing ever. When his laughter finally died down, he stared Fildo in the eyes and admitted he'd been in the guild forever, then pointed out how rough dragons are, basically saying a newbie like Fildo can't just show up and survive. His attitude snapped colder, and he straight up asked Fildo if he really wanted to test his strength. At the same time, the receptionist panicked, ready to warn him that fighting inside the guild was forbidden, until our point giver didn't blink and told the older man not to do it. "I didn't mean it that way." Then the man crouched down to his level and warned him. He'd shatter Fildo's nose before the dragon even got the chance, while he tested the kid's skill. The strong man snapped upright and swung at Fildo with everything he had. But the younger Fildo slipped out of the way at the last second, and the other adventurers erupted into cheers as the clash kicked off. One even lunged in to calm things down and told the strong man to go easier on the boy. Meanwhile, the receptionist asked if he planned to keep bullying new faces like this, since it had happened way too many times. The strong man just grinned, waved her off, and snapped that she should not interrupt their fight. Then he barrels back in and hammers Fildo with non-stop punches, taunting him the whole time about how he keeps dodging. The second Fildo spotted his opening. He swung with everything he had. His punch hit so hard the strong man crumpled straight to the floor, leaving the whole room in stunned silence. The whole room erupted into chatter, like everybody had just watched a David and Goliath showdown. The big strong guy was still stunned, and Fildo leaned in, asking if he was okay, while the kid, yeah, that kid, was the one who stepped forward and apologized, admitting he'd been brought there because he never saw any of this coming. The older woman stared him down and demanded he explain what Fildo didn't even see coming. Then the receptionist spotted those stares and gasped like a seasoned adventurer shouldn't get laid out so easily by someone like him. And she started wondering who Fildo really was, until the very person in Fildo's mind finally popped up. Right there, surprising her, even more than the child. Bow low and apologize for the mess he caused. Then press on, asking even more about the dragons and calming the receptionist as he shares everything she knows. He told Fildo that once they ditched the royal city, a straight shot to the north awaited them, and that the Nautilus Mountains had been crawling with rampaging dragon sightings, especially along a crucial road the merchant crew in Fildo's group used to take, the only one they'd ever had a chance to reach before. He practically ran off grinning because he already knew where the dragon was. Then, before he could even thank the receptionist, she snapped into panic the second she saw him storming out alone. She lunged to call him back, yelling that it was way too dangerous to wander alone, because for quests like this, they always formed a party first. Of course, Fildo was Speedy's kid gone in a blink, yanked out the door before he could even catch what Speedy was trying to say. Then boom, the front desk gets a sudden call, and the receptionist snaps into action, listening hard on the other end. When she's done, she relays the info. Fildo just tore off toward the mountainous area in Nautilus territory, and yeah, he's already kicked off the dragon quest. He caught the other side talking and couldn't believe it. Fildo was somehow tied to the light of glory. Then it all clicked from earlier. Just before the call ended, he made sure they knew Fildo had headed out alone, even though he's insanely strong. And as for the giving point, he was living it up on his very first solo adventure. And he couldn't wait to sink his teeth into that dragon meat. Bobson stumbled back into Glory's headquarters, leaned against the wall, and watched a sword fight rage in front of him. Then Carl, a fresh-faced recruit, slid up and asked how he was holding up, and Bobson eased into a grin as he said their alliance was solid, real solid, and pointed out that the woman over there, she's the real deal. Just as his gun reached for her, she whipped her book up into the air and pulled the moment out from under him. He cut through the air and drove a jab with his gun. Just a few hairs from his neck brushed him, and that tiny slip caught him off guard, but he still hurled himself out of the way at the last second. When it happened, he guessed the next second, snapping his arm into motion to smack hers right under her hole. Then she breathed, counted each stroke, and lined her sword straight for his chest. She towered over him and still managed to smack his wooden sword clean out of his hand. Checkmate, done. But she let him breathe by telling him exactly what he did wrong, praising how he nailed 4 openings, 5 if you count the first. Then she finished the lesson as he ran out of moves. Claude swaggered toward his opponent, hyping his own skills to the max, then straight up threatened that if they were really serious, he could kill them. Guild leader Claude flashed a smile, praised Ed, and feigned shock when he got named the Sword Saint. Then everyone clapped as the moon looked unimpressed, yet still thanked Claude anyway, and even if it was just friendly talk, every word somehow landed perfectly. Dorothy gaped at them, chewing her nails as heat churned in her chest. Claude demanded, "Why are you all over the holy sword?" Just because it had a little skill, and the next second rage snapped through her like lightning when her mood flipped to full-on anger. Right in the middle of her talk to Carl, she bursts into laughter, bragging that beautiful women can be downright cruel to each other. Unless you're the exception, meaning her, out of pure jealousy. Then the pastor demands who came up with that, and Dorothy shoots back with a proud grin that it was her all along. Just before Claude's sudden return cuts them off, and a witch is the first to rush in, practically swooning while she tells him how much she loved chatting with the Saint of Swords. Claude cut her off mid-sentence and snapped that things were bad, leaned in with his body tilted forward, and whispered to the witch that Lunasis was starting to suspect Fildo's absence. Claude says he'll try to stop her, for now, because the giver is taking a break, and he remembers Lunasis telling him on that trip that she wanted to see him soon, just like the person who could actually share the guild leader's experience. He didn't expect to join their guild just because he was hunting Fildo, but once everything hit the fan, he knew his cover story was dead. Then Dorothy freaked out, demanding what they could possibly do, yet even Claude admitted they were already too late. In Dorothy's hands was the piece of Fildo that was supposed to summon the Sword Saint to the party, and the moment she realized that, her head spun into a different plan. When someone asked why she had to cause trouble for someone worthless, Dorothy snapped and nearly threw a tantrum. Meanwhile, Carl and Bobson just kept talking like nothing was wrong, except Bobson admitted he decided not to challenge the Sword Saint, his hands shaking so badly the priest couldn't ignore it anymore. Still staring at his hands, Bobson snapped that something felt wildly wrong, even if he couldn't put it into words, and then his whole body sank like it had lost something, while his gear weighed him down even more. Out of nowhere, Carl slammed in an important phone call and cut him off mid-sentence. The moment the priest spilled the truth, they snapped to action and dragged Claude and Dorothy into it right away. Carl said Fildo was heading north for the mountains, chasing the whole quest solo, and Claude just stared at the news, muttering that going alone up there was pure reckless danger. Then it hit him, Claude's face lit up with an idea, and the next second he burst into wild, maniacal laughter, leaving Carl totally baffled. That's when Claude finally pieced it together, why Fildo vanished from their guild. So this is how it goes, he thought. While he was on vacation, Glor's Fildo Point's glow tricked him into believing the guild would make him stronger. He rashly took the conquest quest by himself, and got ambushed by bandits, dying on the battlefield with a laugh on his lips. Claude even swore the story he spun sounded so real it had to be the greatest setup ever. Then Dorothy burst into laughter as she bought it, calling it their shot, because people don't usually take on requests solo. Now that the pieces were finally in place, Claude couldn't stop thinking about how they'd get rid of Fildo, until Dorothy cut in, reminding him they're the Light of Glory, the top guild, and they have what it takes. Dorothy nodded and promised she'd come too, but warned them to stay sharp, because Carl was already saying that once the two of them showed up, Fildo wouldn't stand a chance. Claude was the Almighty Glory's magic swordsman, and Dorothy was a powerhouse witch whose magic could level mountains. Sure, the priest was already betting Fildo would die, and Claude didn't waste a second. He barked orders to round up everyone who could handle rough, hard jobs, as they geared up to storm into the mountains and haul away every last bit of trash. Meanwhile, Claude rounded up his crew and watched them from the inside out. While the first swore he'd kill Fildo and ranted about him, our point giver happily hauled himself up the mountain, already daydreaming how he'd chow down on dragon meat, soup, or a juicy hamburger steak. On the far side of the mountain, the chaos exploded as the road got blocked, traders and their precious goods froze in place, and every travel car got stuck. Mr. Gonzalez, this heavy-set merchant, stood there watching, fuming that it had been minutes since the line ahead had inched forward. Then a fresh trader stormed in, yelled for everyone to back up, and snapped that the road was impassable. Gonzalez demanded if he told them to shift all the way to the other side of the valley, but before he could get an answer, his hand reported the truth. A dragon had finally stepped onto the road, because it heard all the trouble it was causing. The fat merchant's face pinched with worry. This was the nightmare scenario, because he'd stocked so much merchandise, and the other traders warned that if they couldn't push through that route, they'd have to detour the long way, eating up an extra 3 to 4 days of travel. Mr. Gonzalez snapped back that the road they were taking now was the only efficient shot to reach the mountains, since there weren't any other options. Merchants scrambled to reroute with horses and caravans, and some even had to gut their loads and leave merchandise behind. Because the real nightmare was the dragons, and they kept striking in that area. Traders finally gathered for news when one merchant shouted that he'd called the guild for help. And right then, Fildo leaped up and down, grinning like he already knew how this would end. A merchant scrambled to stop him cold, then warned the point giver that a dragon was about to show up. Right then, Fildo started drawing eyes, even Mr. Gonzalez's, when the older man snapped, asking if he was a rookie adventurer. The merchant added that the guild would dispatch a conquest team, and that if Fildo wanted to be smart, he should step off that road for now. Fildo shot back that he was the very adventurer who'd received the conquest request. But then the moment dragged, like the desert was missing those tumbling weeds. Mr. Gonzalez gently patted Fildo on the shoulder and warned him. Sure, the new adventure had him buzzing, but don't rush in, because dragons were brutal, dangerous, and downright terrifying. Fildo fired back, insisting he was the real deal, and Mr. Gonzalez just shook his head. Dragons didn't get taken down by anyone, they demanded seasoned adventurers. Mr. Gonzalez suddenly slumped over, staring at the crest on his sword, his face flipping from fear to pure awe. He couldn't confirm or deny whether he belonged to that legendary guild, but inside his head he told Fildo the truth. He used to be a member. The merchant looked at him like he'd misjudged him, then hurried to apologize to Fildo for doubting him, and honestly, he knew it wasn't just pride, it was respect. Fildo brushed the apology off instantly, because he understood Mr. Gonzalez only did it out of concern. Then the merchant explained why this mattered. They weren't just hauling goods. They carried crucial cargo like food, medicine, and clothes, the kind that could genuinely change the lives of the people they were delivering them to. That's why slaying the dragon mattered just as much to them. So Mr. Gonzalez lowered his head and begged Fildo for help, and the young man nodded, ready to back him up. Mr. Gonzalez told them he'd rush to the spot where the dragon was hiding. Fildo didn't waste a second. He raced straight to the dragon. He pulled it off, then instantly broke down the creature by its stats. This red dragon was absolutely high level. Sword clenched in his grip, Fildo stared into the mighty beast's eyes, and it just looked away, bored out of its mind, before turning its back on him. The creature answered in the most shocking way, and that's when Fildo snapped. Why'd you suddenly turn around? Because out of all that terrifying mess, something was coming fast straight at it. Ripping across the land, the dragon's tail tore a trail of pure destruction in its wake. But then our young boy's voice rang out, stunned as he gawked at the dragon's impressive presence and marveled that Fildo had emerged completely unharmed. Even with his back packed with painful splinters, the moment the dragon unleashed that bone-chilling roar, everything stopped. Fildo's face went cold the moment he felt just how crushing the pressure was, and even his fingers went numb as the strange tremor hit him straight in the soul. The red dragon didn't even hesitate. It blasted Fildo with a searing, fiery breath. But the adventurer bolted right behind the creature and pulled off a move it had never seen, catching it completely off guard. That red dragon swung its tail to slam him, then Fildo yelled, "I've already seen that move." The red dragon arched hard to dodge its own tail, then backed off just long enough to slash Fildo with its savage claws. But Fildo was already gone, and the dragon spun around, scanning to the side, desperate to find him. Then it finally clicked. This adventurer had rocketed into the air and slammed a punch straight into its neck. But even though Fildo sliced the dragon's head off, the beast shrugged it off because those scales were rock hard. Still, Fildo was bursting with happiness. He bounced up and down with all his might, convinced he'd slain a dragon all by himself, but the real obsession in his heart was the juicy meat he could barely wait to get. At last, Fildo's gaze dropped to his boots, and his stomach turned when he felt that slick, hot mess. Dragon blood. Now the real question hit. How in the world was he going to clean it off? Even knowing this was a death wish, the creature was still right here, until he heard a shout from behind and spun around to see Claude, Dorothy, and a crew of bastards holding Mr. Gonzalez and the other merchants hostage. With a cold, threatening voice, the guild leader leaned in and demanded, "Fildo, do you miss me?" Fildo could only blurt out, "Why?" and Dorothy snapped back that they had no choice. Saint Sword, their new recruit, was hunting him, and yeah, the witch even asked why Fildo wouldn't just tag along. They offered to go, but Fildo's temper flared, and he warned them not to mess with him. Claude snipped the plan, then pitched their next move, and the guild leader slammed down the threat. If Fildo didn't join, monsters might wipe out every merchant in the group. Even when they pushed back, Dia talked Fildo into taking the points giver's demands, and Fildo just fumed, glaring at them. Then they hauled Mr. Gonzalez and the others straight into hostage duty. When Dorothy spoke up again, she jabbed her finger at what was waiting behind the toy on the ground, and Claude's eyes confirmed it, the red dragon. Dorothy opened her mouth to ask if Fildo was the one who killed him, but Claude shot back that someone else must have struck first before he even made it back to their destination. Then the Federation's leader stepped in and told Fildo the adventure was over, right as Fildo braced to unleash his devastating technique straight into the ground. Claude tried to activate his skill, but all he could do was knit his brows, because his sword suddenly felt like a slab of steel, and he couldn't pull a single ounce of magic power out of it. Even Dorothy's jaw dropped at what she saw. Then she slammed her freezing hell skill straight onto Fildo. Dorothy's cold wind fantasy vanished the second she felt something crawling across her skin. Her eyes snapped wide, and panic hit as she realized her greatest magic power had suddenly died. With trembling hands, she realized she could only pull off beginner-level cold magic now. Then a guild member yelled for Claude, asking what went wrong, yet Dorothy fumed because Claude had promised her something different. But just as she was about to hear the guildmaster's explanation, Fildo had already swept them all aside. Dorothy fumed at Claude's careless move. Claude swung his sword at the young man, but one brutal kick shut him down. Fildo scrambled to escape, then fought his way back up and confronted his old guild leader, warning him to stay away from the point giver again, adding that he'd do the same and cut ties for good. Yet that only sent Claude into even deeper rage. Dorothy cranked up her magic and snapped between them out of nowhere, carving a path for their escape. Dorothy shot out her magic steam and wrapped it into a protective screen, so fast it swallowed Fildo's vision hole. The mist tore away, and suddenly it was just the two of them left standing. The guild members she crushed, and even the Fildo merchant, came charging in to help, and the merchant hurried to ask Mr. Gonzalez if he was okay. Mr. Gonzalez waved him off, saying he was fine, just a little banged up from getting caught earlier, and he hurried to thank Fildo before the merchant could argue, guilt gnawing at him for dragging the merchants into all of this. Mr. Gonzalez had already swung back into action, and this time his eyes stayed locked on the dead dragon, because he leaned in and told Fildo the ugly truth. Monsters like this usually get hauled into town to be turned into raw materials. He said the dragon itself was for sale, sure, but hauling it would be a nightmare for adventurers, so the merchant offered them a cart instead, and the crew snapped up the deal. Then the air filled with that sizzling, roasting crackle as dragon meat hit the fire. "Dragons are terrifying threats," Mr. Gonzalez said, "but their horns and organs can heal, their scales harden into armor, their claws become weapons, and their meat." He grinned as the saying came out like a legend. Among adventurers, they swear no part of a dragon ever goes to waste once it's cooked. With no other option, the old man leaned in and asked, "Is everything all right?" Because handing them his priceless catch, using Fildo, was the only move he had left. Even so, they helped the adventurer tear the dragon apart, because there was no way he could swallow all that meat by himself. When Fildo said that, Mr. Gonzalez snapped awake, and now he couldn't stop himself from tearing up just seeing the food piled in front of him. This meat was top tier, the kind you could only find right here in this region. Fildo took a savage bite of the skewer, and the sweet, spicy aroma hit him like a punch. Juicy meat, firm and chewy, kept pulling him in with every chew, while the hot, rich sauce gushed out when he bit down, burning and thrilling his tongue like he'd just devoured a spiced dragon skewer. Mr. Gonzalez spun toward him with a grin and asked how he was doing. So Fildo copied that same look and insisted it was the best. While the night merchants threw a celebration, Claude and Dorothy hustled back to their guild to hash out the whole situation they'd been dealing with. The merchant told Fildo to sprint back to the Royal Adventurers Guild, where they were handing over the dragon's tail to the receptionist, and while he rushed in, every other adventurer froze, shocked to see him. Then once he was back in the castle, the king summoned Glory's leader along with his 3 officials, Claude, Dorothy, and Bobson. The king, older, sharper, and clearly ready to strike, started spilling why he'd summoned them, and he wanted answers about what went down yesterday. The red dragon getting wiped out on Nautilus Street, according to reports, plus the merchants who were there and claimed Claude and the other guild members had taken them hostage, though the king did drop one good detail. They were later released. The king didn't waste a second. He marched straight to the point and demanded an explanation from Claude, and Claude answered with a heavy, solemn tone that whatever the king said was utterly disappointing. His courage towered over everyone, and the king's majesty sat there with an unreadable face, while Claude stepped up and reminded him, loud and clear, that their guild was the talk of the country, even if some phonies tried to pose as big shots and still couldn't touch their status. Dorothy stared at him, shocked that he could lie with a straight face so convincing she even wondered if one of them had trained him. Then the former member and the king both demanded answers about why the guild wouldn't do the same, since he'd already lied when he traveled, and Claude snapped back that they were gone and had skipped the council for the last few days. After hearing their side, the king stopped pushing and made it crystal clear that having crimes done on their behalf was deadly serious. But he also admitted he knew exactly what the guild could do, and still, request after request had crashed before. A few days later, he made it crystal clear. As guild leader, Claude had to grow his crew and recruit real power, competent members who could carry the guild forward, not dead weight. Then the king dropped the warning bomb too. Get cocky or careless, and after everything that just happened, that could spell the guild's downfall. They need to shut off the king's light of glory right now, then report every piece of news so they're ready for what comes next. Claude and the others dropped their heads and begged the king to step in and help. But his face burned into Fury's mind, cursing Fildo. Fildo nearly choked when he realized the older man wasn't just some random guy. He owned the shop with everything from accessories and weapons to medicines, and Mr. Gonzalez stayed humble the whole time, pouring more tea and snacks while insisting his shop wasn't even on that level. Even so, he stayed sweet and even apologized for handing over snacks only. Yet Filda still beamed, because the way Mr. Gonzalez thanked him made it feel like more than enough. Fildo was mid-snack when a man in armor stormed into the room and closed in like a threat. Sure, he acted respectful, but Fildo's jaw dropped when he asked, right to his face, about the adventurer named Fildo Electria. The food giver wiped the crumbs off his face, and Fildo shot up from his seat to talk to the man. Suddenly, the man snaps out of his rudeness bows and introduces himself as the captain of the royal guard, not some random member, saying he's come for the youth because the king personally ordered it. Then tells Fildo that they heard a reward was handed out to the one who first killed the dragon, which flips Fildo into full panic and makes him want to shut it all down. But then Mr. Gonzalez clamps a hand over Fildo's mouth and leans in with that heavy, close-up grin. He snapped at Fildo, warning that turning down the king's gifts was the height of rudeness, and the moment Fildo heard him, he wheeled toward the captain and flashed a cold grin right back. Terrified, the adventurer swallowed his pride and accepted his offer. Not long after, Fildo suddenly found himself right inside the royal palace. And when the captain finally introduced him to the king, his presence hit like thunder. His Majesty locked eyes with Fildo, and Fildo shot back a tense stare, then couldn't help but flinch. Then the old man's face lit up with joy, and the second Fildo spotted the adventurer who'd killed the dragon, he dropped his head in greeting to the king, only for the king to wave him off, laughing that there was no need for ceremony, because it was the younger man who took down the red dragon terrorizing their streets. The king straight up admitted they'd struggled to keep their country's supply lines safe from monsters, and crowned Fildo a real hero for handling it. Even with Fildo feeling grateful, all he could think about was one thing at the start: dragon meat. Panic hit, and he blurted to the king that he couldn't take the gold coins, but the king wouldn't let him leave empty-handed without a reward. He even thought about handing Fildo one of his territories and straight up asked if he wanted it. Then when Fildo was offered the title of lord, he just smiled, waved it off, and shut it down. Suddenly, the adventurer's tone hardened, and he told the king, "I'm truly thankful, but Fildo knows he can't hold that territory if you hand it to him. He'd rather chase the wider world, learn new things, and come back stronger." Even with a heavy heart, the king still let Fildo go, slipped him a gift to help him on his way, and despite the sadness, made sure he didn't face the road alone. Fildo bowed his thanks, then headed to the gate to meet the captain right after their meeting wrapped up. He already knows how skilled Fildo is with experience and distribution, and he'd be thrilled if Fildo stays right here in the country. So he's struck with shame because Fildo refused to bolt, and right then Fildo's skin prickles. He finally clicks that the king is way more cunning than he looks, even though the king is supposed to be the top authority in this country. Fildo swallows those thoughts and focuses on what matters right now, the money gift he's been handed. Fildo's never seen this much money, first from the Union, and then from the whole state too, and honestly, he could buy anything he wants. But right now his brain can't find a single thing she could get with all that cash. Still, the idea won't leave him alone now. He's starting to think about upgrading his gear, because if he's going to play the part, he needs to look like a real adventurer. Just when it all seemed like it was over, Fildo chose to head back to Mr. Gonzalez's place for a breather, totally oblivious to the fact that someone was right behind him. Lunasis snapped the holy sword forward and slammed it into the unconscious Fildo. Right at the last second, Fildo finally clocked it. Lunasis had launched over to him and hugged him with a bright, smiling grin. Fildo wasn't just frozen. Her cheeks were burning red as she blushed. The saint's sword kept insisting she'd known all along it was him, and that he'd been dying to meet her. But all Fildo could manage was groaning that the armor on her chest was killing him, and Lunasis didn't even hear him. She went on and on about how long she'd waited with the guild, yet Fildo just kept firing questions at everyone there. Every single guild member shut him down with the same answer. The giver was still on vacation. Then the crowd stares hit, and Fildo's panic shot through the roof. Eventually, the legendary sword saint finally let him go, and before doing it, he made sure of one thing. He was the very same adventurer who'd once worked for a huge guild from someplace far away. At first, they had no clue, but when he finally said her name, she lit up with a warm smile, and she admitted she'd always respected him from the bottom of her heart. Right then, Fildo tossed aside his own experiences and threw everything he had into the guild. Lunasis even spilled the truth. Everything the light of glory accomplished came from Fildo working in the shadows. And just as he tried to steady his nerves, he realized he'd grabbed the crowd's attention again. He snapped back, telling her, "Don't worry, I'm already out of the guild." Lunasis blurted out, stunned, "Why are you going quiet?" Before Fildo could even explain, then they dragged him to a stop, saying they'd seen enough already and they didn't want anyone stuck with useless skills. For his part, Fildo told her he gave them fair warning too, because Claude and the others pushed him out in the first place. Fildo looked at Lunasis with ice in his eyes and told him straight up that he'd ditched the guild life. Now he was a freelance adventurer, chasing big dreams on his own with nothing tying him down. Lunasis snapped, "Wait, so I'm hearing right, you're out of the guild now?" And Fildo cut back, "Yes," with absolute certainty. Without a single word after that, Lunasis demanded he team up with her and form a party. Lunasis storms out of the Glory Guild's glow, seething, while Claude is even more furious. He just watched a huge chunk of money vanish to get in, and he snaps that the palace ordeal was wrong. Lunasis stays cool and tells him plainly, nothing happened wrong. She simply refuses to join unless Fildo's in the guild. Then she apologizes to the guild master for not saying it sooner, turns to leave, and promises Claude she'll come back for the deposit from the contract signing before walking out for good, no hesitation, no looking back. Claude reached for her again, but when nothing came back, rage surged, and he couldn't stop asking what was wrong with Fildo. I mean, how is Claude still not getting it? Their wins are all because of Fildo. Yeah, he just couldn't wrap his head around it, until Fildo hit him with a calm, comfortable hum, and then, boom, the door swung open. The office doors opened again when Carl burst in out of breath, and this time the guild members swarmed around Claude as he came downstairs, staring at the mess his men had caused. Two guild members clashed on the spot, and one of them snapped, "Don't forget, you said joining the light of glory would give us power exactly how we want." Yeah, it's real. Lately, even the guild members have finally admitted they've been messing up on a bunch of recent missions. And the worst part, even when the quests were supposed to be easy, some adventurers still got thrown into real trouble, dying no matter how skilled they were, depending on what happened next. Claude even warned the guild leader that they might have to leave, and that lit a spark of fear in the crowd. Then, right on cue, some injured guild members showed up, staring at him like, "So you think our injuries are some kind of joke, Claude?" What? One of them swore, "I just saw the sword saint walk out, so yeah, that's my cue." And the moment they said that, they were sure of one thing: the guild leader will tear them apart and they'll split up for good. Claude tries to brush it off, but one of them snaps back. Strange things have been happening ever since Fildo vanished. They're all certain they were making progress, and they keep recalling how Claude once promised that joining the light of glory would boost their abilities. They even shoved it in the guild leader's face that he'd been the one who said Fildo would only drag them down. Then the guild members stared at how Claude always let Fildo take on missions far above his level. Wondering what the kid was really up to the moment, they came back to that altar. When Fildo's Royal Adventurer Guild asked about the elven country, the receptionist cracked a shaky smile and insisted she knew the legend. Then one adventurer who caught it all told Fildo he'd heard it from his great-grandmother, except the tale got twisted and suddenly blamed goblins from Midway. Fildo went back for answers, but every time he tried, people laughed at him for buying into stories like that. Finally, he stormed into the library for answers, seething because nobody would take him seriously. Staring hard at the catalog, he realized the section on elves was almost impossible to crack, and he had to admit the only elfland's knowledge he owned came from childhood books, just stories back then. To him, elves were pure mystery. Sure, they never showed up in society, but that never stopped him from chasing his next mission, slipping off to elf country with a single book and hunting for answers. He kept thinking about how elf country always haunted ancient tales and fairy tales, which made him certain a real race behind it existed, even if the world gave him next to nothing to work with. He was so locked in on what he was doing that he didn't even clock the moon standing right next to him, until she suddenly asked if he was into elves, and he practically jumped when she was about to shut the moment down. He shot up a finger to shush everyone because they were in the library. They started whispering, and Fildo shot her a question. "Why are you here?" She leaned in and said she wanted to invite him to a party. Fildo reminded her he'd already turned her down, but the sword saint didn't flinch. Then she asked if it was really fine for her to be here, and what he thought of her work at the guild. Lunasis tossed it off like it was nothing, and that made Fildo snap his voice up in shock. The librarian cut them down with a furious glare for the noise, while the sword saint leaned in and said she only joined the guild because she'd been tracking Fildo, then quickly steered the talk, clocking the book he was clutching and using it to hide her face. Fildo turned bright and admitted he was hunting the elf country, but before he could even finish, she struck back that it was just a fairy tale, because the real thrill of adventure is chasing something no one has ever seen, something that isn't meant to be found by Luna. That wasn't a joke. It lit a fire under her to join, while he started wondering if she was trying to hit him with some kind of human wave tactic. And the wild part is she kept talking so casually that they completely forgot they were in the library. She vehemently denied it, then marched right up to Fildo claiming she knew the secret route to the elven country, freaking him out, until the two of them got kicked out of the library. He grabbed her shoulders to get her attention, then demanded to know if the elven country was real. A spark of pure excitement blazed in his eyes, and Luna's smile lit up even brighter. But Lunasis didn't say a word. She spun away and teased him with a joke, telling him she could probably guide him if they teamed up. He burned with frustration and a little annoyance, yet he finally caved and accepted, only for her to refuse. Before Lunasis invited him to head to the elven country, he made one thing crystal clear. This trip was temporary, just until they hit their destination. But for Lunasis, that was all she needed to light up with happiness, while Fildo kept warning her it wouldn't last forever, then cut the hesitation and told her, "Smile, because once I get what I want, you'll finally see it." Meanwhile, back at the guild, Claude couldn't wrap his head around what he was hearing. His pulse hammered as the guild leader snapped at the captain, demanding to know why he'd make a decision like that, and what it was all for. He issued the decree to drag every Eternal Glory activity into an endless timeout. Anything done under the light of glory was now slammed shut and forbidden. When His Majesty heard Claude's last words, alarm hit hard, and the king ordered Claude to seize the troublemakers who had played him for a fool. The captain then warned the guild leader. Until this mess was handled, the guild couldn't keep operating. He made it crystal clear. Everyone had to obey His Majesty's words, and if anyone dared to pull off unauthorized stuff, the worst of them would face harsher punishments than ever. Right before the door shut, the older man grabbed Claude's attention and warned him the guild could be dissolved. But that wouldn't stop anyone from doing their own personal activities. The door slammed shut fast and Claude hurled something inside. Then it vanished as he roared, "That's the Light of Glory, the highest guild in the whole country." Carl and Dorothy tried to calm him down, but Claude was too wound up. He couldn't stop asking how all of this happened when they'd just kicked out Fildo and dragged in the Sword Saint. He was sure they could hit the reset button because his friends were still on their side. Then, out of nowhere, every guild member wiped him out, even though he'd promised them it was just temporary. He snapped to Claude, saying he'd hunt down another guild, and the older man even warned him nobody in their right mind would throw themselves into that kind of danger, then apologized for vanishing so abruptly, only for Bobson, completely rattled, to grab the man by the collar and roar that they'd already long ago lost the Light of Glory. Right then, a punch slammed into Bobson's cheek. Carl blasted him across the room the moment the older man turned his back, and right after his goodbyes, he was at his friend's side in a flash, grabbing the bigger man's shoulder and asking if he was okay. Suddenly, Bobson's sobs erupted, tears flooding his eyes as he blurted that it hurt worse than anything, that he could handle a beating any other day, but not this time. He choked out a call for his mother, while Carl scrambled to cast magic and heal him. Claude stood there, frozen, as Carl's magic fizzled and failed right in front of him. Then Claude told their guild leader he couldn't heal, and Carl turned toward him, tears blazing in his eyes. Seeing his guild crumble to pieces completely shattered him inside. Meanwhile, Fildo was off living his own wild adventures. He just chopped off the fallen werewolf's head, then snapped his focus onto the other two, who immediately scrambled to get away. The second Fildo locked eyes with them, he stopped chasing, rage simmering at those creatures. Then he stared at the forest like, where's the elven country supposed to be? This time there wasn't a real path anywhere, so he couldn't help wondering how fast Lunasis found it and started talking about it. The Sword Saint had a whole storm of things to share, from warning him about war wolves to pointing out a spring up ahead, and Fildo couldn't shake the feeling that it all mirrored something that had happened to him once before. He always knew where to go, but the snap of a spring yanked his focus, and in one flash he remembered his friend had no weapon. So he bolted straight to the Sword Saint to warn her that the war wolves were about to show up. In spring, she was like the moon battling a war wolf, then smashing it with her bare hands, moving on like it was nothing, and somehow getting everyone to play along. The creature felt its courage crumble and then scampered away fast, like it couldn't take the pressure. But now Luna's eyes locked on Fildo when he asked to join her, and the second he admitted he only showed up because he knew she was unarmed, he went beet red. Lunasis shot him a warm, loving smile and clocked every bit of worry the adventurer couldn't hide. So after a quick moment where she admitted Fildo seemed really nice, she flipped the conversation and asked straight up if he was sure Fildo didn't want to join her for a bath, or if he just didn't find her attractive enough. Then Fildo muttered in a low voice that the girls would probably lose their minds if he tried. The Sword Saint finally admitted she'd been insecure, until Fildo hit her with, "I think you're pretty," and her heart flipped so hard she demanded he come over right after she finished bathing. Then the two of them set off again, continuing their journey toward the elf country with everything they'd learned. When Fildo reached the maze's end, he went silent for a beat. Then a voice yanked him forward, and in the end he demanded answers. Why did that person know so much about the elf country? And ever since they first met, she'd been treating him with this sweet, careful kindness, little hints all along. Fildo, worn out and exhausted, snapped that he couldn't believe someone like her would praise anyone just because they refused to put themselves first. Right as he opened his mouth for the next question, a massive wolf lunged in front of him and thrust out a hand, claws ready to strike, so he snapped his sword out in time. Fildo was ready to clash with him, but Lunasis snapped, "Back off," because that rank was her opponent's territory before the creature even got close to her. Fildo gets it, she's got her reasons, and if she's not ready to spill them, he's fine with that. She swallows her pride, apologizes for crossing his line, and in a warm, gentle voice she promises, "When the time's right, I'll tell you, because I want you to truly know me." They press on toward the misty labyrinth, and just as they near it, she grabs his hand, telling him, "No matter what, don't you ever let go." They kept silent, but he already felt it. Lunasis was about to drop the truth the moment they stepped into the misty maze. Lunasis ditched the drama and got practical with Fildo, closing in hard the moment he tried to back away. The holy sword blared a warning that if he strayed even a little, he'd vanish from everyone else in the misty labyrinth. Get it wrong with those worried brows, and it could turn deadly. Heat rushed into Lunasis's cheeks as Fildo snapped back that he could feel how far she was just by her voice, and that her tactic had to be the one pulling her closer to him. Then, right as she teetered toward the cliff's edge, Fildo warned her, because if Lunasis hadn't clamped onto his hand and yanked him back up, she would have had to tell him to watch himself in that stretch of land that had no ground at all. Fildo wouldn't have had a choice. He'd just been forced to obey her every command, and it didn't take long after Lunasis shouted that he'd spotted him. An elf from a country, no bigger than a plate, was staring in awe at the land everyone swore was fairyland. Suddenly, Fildo lunged straight into the chaos bubbling in his chest, and the moment the two touched down at the entrance, the giver blurted out that he'd never, ever laid eyes on a place this beautiful. He swung his gaze to her, blurted out thanks to Lunasis for bringing him there, then instantly said he had to return the favor. Right now. No delay, no hesitation, and the holy sword ordered him to set up a party with her friend. With her eyes squeezed shut, Lunasis begged, "Tell me, would the kiss be okay?" And he snapped no again, totally missing the fact that two people were stalking them from the tall grass. This time, Lunasis marched right up to Fildo, grinning through nerves, and demanded, "Why won't you give it to me?" Fildo recoiled so hard he basically slammed his own head to the ground. Then the two watchers finally burst out and lost their minds, screaming in madness. Danon and Sana, two elven kids, lit up with joy when Sword Saint asked how they were doing. They traded questions back and forth, begging the Sword Saint to say how she really felt, until she admitted straight up that she was fine. Then they turned the spotlight on the guy next to her, asking if he was her boyfriend, and the Sword Saint's face burned with embarrassment when he had to tell them they didn't want any of that. Fildo snapped the door shut on any romance, told them they were only acquaintances, and as he watched the three women click and clash, he couldn't even find the words to explain what he'd truly been all along. Luna finally rose, looked him dead in the eye, and admitted that maybe, just maybe, she felt the same realization too. The Saint's sword kept dragging him straight into the city, and all Fildo could do was stare at its people like priceless statues, especially when every single one of them made him gasp with pure admiration. With those long ears of his, Giver sized up the elves, men and women alike, and declared they were equally stunning. When Lunasis told him he didn't even have confidence in his own looks, Fildo just snapped his eyes to the other two elves, and realized right then how stunning they were. Right as she was about to bring up Lunasis, she blurted that she felt Luna's level had climbed, watched the room light up with pure ecstasy. Then Fildo pressed her on what she meant, and Giver snapped back that it's rare to find someone who can analyze, and now that he'd come to the party with her, his experience was turning way louder. Lunasis admitted she never thought she could top who she is right now, and Fildo thanked her for that. Then Fildo turned around and told her she was still strong enough, leaving Lunasis stunned, because he said he wasn't done yet. Fildo's face went blank, and his gaze snapped to the elves coughing all around. Then he realized just how many of them were truly sick. Fildo leaned in and asked if things had felt weird lately. Danon nodded right away, and Sana claimed it had to be some forest magic kind of power messing with everything. Because when that power started to dry up, the adults began scrambling nonstop. Then one of them dropped the bombshell that Illumina had fallen ill just a few days ago, and Sword Saint and Filda just froze, stunned, before demanding who could possibly say such a thing. Lunasis answered, "It's my younger sister, with magic even sharper than mine, and she's gentler than anyone in the world, so yeah, it makes me proud." "So tell me," they pressed, "where is Illumina now?" Lunasis snapped in surprise, and she felt a heavy debt to her for dragging her here. Now at least Illumina's plans would include her too, and since she was an outsider, being left alone didn't bother her one bit. This time those two elf kids couldn't help wondering if she was really Luna's lover, but he brushed their doubts away fast. They were crushed, yet Luna only managed a quick smile before snapping right back to business. They raced for the castle, and right at the gates the guards froze, because the princess was back, standing there with a strange man at her side. The sentries tried to block them and demanded to check if he was human, but she claimed he was her lover, until Fildo stepped in and said, "No, he's just an acquaintance," and the Sword Saint piled on that she was his guest, making it crystal clear he wouldn't disrespect her. Then they marched straight into a giant hall where documents covered the walls, and X marks pointed to most of them by showing the moon. So His Highness, Lunasis Archelite, knew with a jolt that he'd finally returned. The male elf spun toward Lunasis, and then slammed a slap across her face. His voice thundered as rage flared in his eyes, and he demanded answers, what she was doing here and why she'd come back. This elf leader, her own father, a mad tyrant, kept snarling at her, telling Lunasis he'd shoved all her princess duties onto her younger sister Illumina, and now Illumina was wrecked with a princess's sickness. Lunasis begged for forgiveness, but his rage wouldn't cool, and he demanded to know what her apology was even supposed to mean. The elven princess snapped that if they kept leaning on the state's wisdom, their future was already dead, and they'd hit the point where they couldn't keep pretending they could handle it all alone. She pushed them to hunt for a real solution to their burning problems, and the prince even insisted he understood, because His Excellency caught on too. Still, the elder just sneered and asked mockingly if she was truly ready to go that far. And that's when she proved she had found the one answer the wisest couldn't give her father. And finally, the older man dropped his voice and told his daughter she had to do it, while the elves, looking rough around the edges, poked him and asked why. He snapped back to the board and told Fildo they were running on dangerously low magic, because elves live and breathe on the forest's life force. The old belief says when an elf feeds on the forest's power, they'll have a child who grows up and restores the land's magic. But lately, the elf population has been getting slaughtered, dragged down by threats from outsiders. So the forest's magic is slipping away, draining the elves' vitality and crushing their chances to reproduce. Even with their long lives, the elves can't keep their numbers up anymore. And today, powerful people with serious magic stepped in, using their powers to protect the forest in exchange. Then they picked a new princess to take over the role that used to belong to the first one. Only now it was Illumina's turn, and the elf king finally saw his daughter again, pressing her with one burning question. Why did she leave the country? In the heavy silence, the elf woman didn't snap back at her father right away. So he spun to Fildo and blurted his gratitude for bringing Lunas back. And he promised that would let Fildo stay a few days, all to honor his daughter. With his hands stretched out and eyes locked in, he snapped that Lunasis needed to step up and take the duty he'd been handed. Then he thanked Fildo, admitted she'd helped her this far, and pushed hard to try and tap into her power. Lanisis hated the trouble she'd caused the people around her, because she just wanted to dazzle Fildo with the beauty of her home. Until, right as she tried to head to her father, Fildo yanked her back. Fildo leaned in and swore that with his powers, he'd rip through the chaos and save their country. He bragged that his power could turbocharge the EXP his party earned. Then he made it all his and decided exactly how to spread it. She balled her fists tight, and Fildo snapped out the truth. Their land didn't have enough magical power to keep the forest alive, so he'd use his own strength to force the elves' power to rise and bring the forest's vitality back. The Elf King can only stammer about his wild power, but Fildo isn't done yet. He says the experience hits harder now, and he can hand it out to whoever he wants, no matter what the king thinks. Still, the giver in his bones tells the older man to try it at least once, right there with a hand on his chest, because the country needs it. Fildo stared down the Elf King, radiating pure intent, like he was begging the others to hand him the chance to unleash his powers and save the country. As soon as their meeting snapped shut, they rushed straight there, and in Illumina's room, she saw the same girl collapsed and sick on the bed. Suddenly, she clocked Fildo staring at her from the doorway, and Lunacy stepped in too. Then the two of them kicked back and chatted for a bit. Fildo asked if he was really fine standing there, and Luna shot back that the very first question should be whether something was bothering her. Then she launched into it, telling him about the tall woman she'd seen staring at her a while back. And once Fildo matched her description, he was sure it was Luna Sis, Mom, until he finally realized it was a male. Because honestly, even he couldn't wrap his head around how anyone could miss how old an elf was just by looking. Luna Sis added that it had been ages since anyone from their country had even seen humans. She shot him a cutting look, then blurted out an apology for every bit of trouble she'd caused. Because the only way to find a cure the elves can't even touch is to leave the country and hit the road, chasing answers wherever they hide. Until she finally got sick of it and boredom kicked in. Then she finally clocked that her powers had always pulled her in, so she built a plan by leaning on connections that were already there. And that's when Fildo understood. She didn't just stumble into his life, she acted like she'd known him for ages. And right there, as Lanisis demanded, "Why are you helping my country?" She straight up admitted she had no real reason, but he still said, "If I have to, I'm thanking you for bringing me to elf country." Even so, Fildo insists it'd be a tragedy to waste a country this beautiful. But then he remembers what family and home really mean, and when he sees the party's members in danger, he decides they'll have to stick together and help. To him, being an adventurer meant exactly that, so Lunasis only smirked softly, then told him the real reason his old teammates were now using him like that. Right as they were about to clash, the king burst in out of nowhere and ordered Fildo to talk with them in private. He raised a hand to the humans, telling them to slip in quietly as he marched through the long, pitch-black corridor. Fildo couldn't shake the question of why the king brought him here, but the king didn't even spare him a hello. He just said the sword Fildo was holding was nearly maxed out, and Fildo stared in shock, remembering how it had slaughtered dragons and werewolves. Then the king snapped, "Stop," right before a huge door. With a sharp raise of his hand, the elf king seemed to grab something from the air, and the next second, wheels snapped into motion and the door mechanism roared to life. The king snapped that almost nobody left in the kingdom was still capable of guarding the treasure. Now the place was basically deserted. The very next day, he tracked down those abilities Fildo had teased and demanded answers from whoever had them. Where could he get that kind of experience? Fildo told Lunasis that to boost the power, they had to hunt people with real experience. And then he leaned in with a plan, because he already had the creature picked out. Lunasis said the northern plain had bigger monsters, and he could funnel the experience from beating them straight to the goal. The Elf King saw it all, but he still had to ask if it was really just him and Lunasis, since two people alone wouldn't give the amplification they needed. And that answer makes Fildo frown, even as he shoots back that their real problem isn't the power at all. It's the lack of party members and the weapon switching to the sword right in front of them. He strode up to the weapon, snatched it from the ground, and declared, "This is the Saint Excalibur sword, a secret treasure meant to be handed down through their country." He pushed Fildo to grab it, then shoved the sword into his hands. The guy even promised he'd hand him 100 of his weapons. Then an adventurer, stunned by the whole deal, marched right up to the Elf King and insisted he couldn't take something this huge. But the elf king crushed his hopes. There was nobody left in their country who could take on that task. So he threw himself back into the research that had been going on for ages, only to hit the same wall again and again with no solution in sight. This time he dropped to both knees, gripping the sword with both hands, and finally confessed to the younger man that he was ashamed. Because even now, he still wasn't strong enough to trust everything to someone like him. The Elven King then pleaded for him to save them, insisting it was for their country's future, while the king himself shook with helpless terror as he begged. At last, Fildo grabbed the sword and stepped up to accept it from the king of the land. The elves offered to swap Lunasis's brand new armor, then basically dared to come get him. Guaz said that right there, 100 elven soldiers were waiting for him. Agat the elves' captain stepped forward and introduced himself to Fildo, saying their king warned them about the situation, though even he sounded unsure. Fildo shrugged and admitted he was only an outsider, just a normal human, and he didn't expect them to believe a word. Then he threw out a loud laugh and promised, "When I'm laughing like that, I'm saying something else." The captain leaned in and told him not to panic. This wasn't a request, it was an order. The race riled him up, and a bigger grin split Fildo's face, because deep down he knew he was the leader of this crew. They pushed him to give a quick speech before the operation kicked off, and even with his doubts, Fildo still nodded and did exactly what they wanted. He told everyone, "Yeah, they might doubt us because I'm foreign, but I've seen the miracles in this country and felt the kindness of its people with my own eyes." Even though they'd only just met, Fildo's vowed he'd protect the fairy land, then pleaded, "Help me save our home." He counted on the knights backing him to keep his troops pumped, and he drove that point home, telling his men the fate of the whole country hinged on how they fought. So they surged with fierce energy toward the northern plains. They'd been hunting those monsters for days, and now they were desperate to find where they'd gone. One day, while they were on the move, the soldiers grabbed Fildo and demanded a quick rest, saying most of their crew was already waiting at the destination. Then, worn out, Giver sprinted to the ascent, snatched a thermos, and took a long, exhausted sip. As she praised her, the captain pointed out, right to everyone, that even after pounding the road on foot for days, she showed zero signs of breathlessness, while countless elves around her were wheezing and struggling. And that was the first real hope they wouldn't end up as a burden if things got worse. Fildo swore they wouldn't ask Lunatius where they were, not with that map in their hands. By then, it had stretched on so long you'd swear the planes were never coming, yet the princess insisted they should have landed already. So he snapped his sword up and tried to cut through the delay. Then he snapped his attention to Lunasis and demanded, "Can you cut straight through the ground?" It shocked him, sure, but he couldn't stop thinking about why he wouldn't just do it. After all, the sword the elves handed him was a priceless treasure, and Fildo refused to see it scratch the earth for the very first time. So the princess swung her gaze to Agat and asked, "You do it!" And Agat immediately shook his head. Fildo tried to plead again, but he'd already done it once. With no other options left, he finally began carving into the ground, and everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. In the dead quiet, Fildo fired off his theory about monsters lurking underground, until the earth suddenly buckled and shook. Agat snapped to the soldiers, yelling, "Get ready, but stay calm." Then the space cracked open and lunged for the lower ground, and Fildo cut in fast, saying the monster wasn't down there. This entire mountain range was really just a nightmare warning. Monsters were coming, and the land already knew. Fildo was right. When the mountain shifted, it erupted into a deafening roar. Between you and me, this feels insanely close to a Godzilla situation. A traveler hit the plains village, ran dry on cash, and begged a villager to let him pay his way. Then night dropped over a quiet hut, and he started to drift off until the middle of the night, when strange rumbles and shaking vibrations tore through the darkness and kept going until morning. When the terrified villagers finally stumbled outside, their huts were gone, leaving only him and Fildo behind. And as Fildo stared up in awe, the monster army roared again. Lunasis demanded, "What's the point?" And the giver leaned in, telling her the monsters looked like wingless dragons. A terrifying dinosaur the size of Rex. Fildo's jaw dropped, because he'd never seen anything this massive in his life. While the panic raged, Fildo leaned on the captain and asked how the soldiers kept their ranks unbroken. The captain just shook his head and said fighting that monster wasn't something a handful of people could pull off. Fildo felt downright silly obsessing over the next move, but he snapped at the captain to keep the troops from spreading out. Right now, the priority was to make the monster lock onto them before it even started moving. Then he ordered Lunasis to hammer it again. The holy sword erupted in a storm of crushing strikes, plowing through the ground. Then the monster abruptly skidded to a dead stop. The monster screamed so loud it rattled Lunasis to the bone, and she couldn't stop asking what its deal was. Then Fildo snapped the truth. It was massive, slow, and pain couldn't touch it, so they'd have to bide their time to get past. The monster jerked around and flashed its back, tricking the holy sword into thinking it didn't strike. While Fildo, clueless that it even knew he existed, flinched at every loud rustle and sound. He still remembered how the red dragon moved when he battled it, and without a second thought, he snapped to Lunasis and the captain, mobilized the troops and get behind him. Barred the panic with a fierce warning, telling everyone their forces had regrouped, and an attack was about to slam down. As Fildo closed in, his tail buzzed with the Elf King's warning, how the elven country's true treasure was that sword, and how only the strong should dare to touch it. Still, if it ever ended up in Fildo's hands, maybe he'd finally unlock everything it held. The king told the adventurer to lock his focus on the blade, because once Fildo set his mind, the sword would take it from there. Finally, the monster's tail slammed down, but they couldn't tell if it cracked into Fildo with full force, and new wounds kept piling up before he even felt sure Fildo could win this. Yet the battle raged on. At last, he clamped down his instincts and chose to hold back. Fildo burst into a sprint, convinced that only a light sword could bite through the skin's surface. And he realized he'd have to mix up his attacks, so he leapt sky-high and slammed the monster down, almost burying Fildo under rubble this time. Giver snapped at it again and again, hacking through its hide bit by bit, getting more and more frustrated, because nothing he tried was working. If this was going to end, he had to hit the one vulnerable spot with full, brutal force. Suddenly, the monster hurled him into the air, and right when he was about to drop. That creature chewed through him while Lunasis' face went ghost-white, watching Fildo get swallowed alive like it was nothing. The adventurer snapped his focus onto his sword and unleashed his new technique, X-Skill Hollowbreaker, carving the monster open from the inside. After he split that massive monster clean in two, the troops erupted in cheers for him. But the moment he spotted Fildo plummeting to the ground, unease crashed through him. Fildo couldn't even twitch a finger. His stamina and magical power had been ripped clean away, so he couldn't move at all. And as he crashed down, he panicked that dying like this would make it all pointless, until Lunasis, the elf princess, burst in and caught him. Reality hit him like a gut punch, and he couldn't stop thinking. What if living too long came with consequences nobody warned about? His senses finally went dull as stone, and he told Lunia the truth. Every word of it was real. Even as his wife tried to shut him down, he finally broke it to her. His Majesty's artifacts didn't just amaze, they stretched people's lives, and the two of them had already lived that truth. Even with everything falling apart, they never gave up, until the gas suddenly burst in and their daughter Illumina was saved. They demanded to know where Fildo was right that second. The Elf King stepped up to talk about one thing, bringing him into the family as a son-in-law, because their daughter was absolutely crazy about Luna. A low shock hit the air as Fildo cut straight to the point, because the giver had already started heading out of Elf country when Lunasis shouted, "Wait, you forgot your coat." As she lunged to take it, Fildo snapped, asking why she looked like she was about to travel too. The princess confessed she could trail him and prove her point. He demanded how she planned to escape the fog maze by herself. With a solemn bow, she said her country still wasn't fully saved. Yet now, thanks to Fildo, it was finally healing, and there was still so much to fix before it could stand on its own again. Then Fildo's worry hit hard. If he even caught a glimpse that Fildo was sick, everything could fall apart. Sure, Fildo had incredible strength, but he charged into dangerous moves without thinking first. The impact of his actions was so wild that if he didn't stop himself, one wrong stumble, and he could have been dead. Lunasis told him she needed him to live long and healthy, and that fired up Fildo. He asked if it was because of his strength, but the elf princess shut that down fast. She just wanted to be with him, even if it only lasted a little. And when she flashed that sweet smile, the words spilled out so fast she practically melted with embarrassment. Fildo flashed her the green light to do whatever she wanted, but the second he spun around, he caught someone else standing beside Lunasis. And when both of them whirled back, their shock hit hard. It was Illumina. Meanwhile, in that pitch-black alley, the light of glory backed into the corner while rats inched closer and closer. Claude kept muttering that they were supposed to be the strongest guild back then. So why was this disaster happening now? Next, we cut to a younger Claude, cards in hand. Then bam, his old guild leader calls his name and Claude snaps over to him in an instant. Seeing the child with the leader made Claude's mind race. Then the older man told him he'd picked that kid up from the orphanage just a few days ago, and now they're co-workers. The man said the guild leader had shoved the child into Claude's hands, and Claude just grumbled about why he had to babysit, while the other guild members cracked up when he congratulated himself for finally getting a little brother. The last one could only rub the back of his head, furious and stuck with no choice at all. Claude only asked the kid's name. Then the moment he heard Fildo's voice, Claude snapped awake and found himself flipped upside down. Bobson scooped him up on the spot while Carl and Dorothy sprinted beside them. Then Carl caught it. Claude was awake, but the others just yelled, "Keep running!" so they wouldn't get caught. The guild leader was helpless in that battered state, yet agony ripped through his arms and his face burned like it was on fire. Dorothy demanded, "Did you seriously forget what just happened?" While he told her how those bites nearly tore him apart. He confessed they took the job only because it came from a low-level request, but the giant rats in the underground canal almost swallowed him whole, so they had to fall back with injuries. Then, when the witch confronted him, he shoved the blame onto her, because she'd sparked that fight with the client, only for the client to snap back that if the military police hadn't shown up, Claude would have died right there. Dorothy kept grumbling that she never should have come, while Claude headed out on yet another adventure alone, until Bobson cut him off and reminded him the very first quest still mattered. Then, just as things started to heat up, they got yanked to a stop the moment they arrived at their quarters. They got hit with the sight of other adventurers getting wasted, and she demanded to know where he'd found the dealers. But he clammed up, refusing to share a single detail, even as he told the young guild leader he'd be happy to play along as the pay kept rolling in. Then he raised his cup, toasted to the light of glory, and on their way to Dorothy, he glared at them and called them parasites. Realizing those folks would camp there until their cash ran dry, Carl slipped back to their rooms and started patching up the rat bite on Claude's arm. Dorothy asked for proof, and the reply hit hard. Every last guild member looked as useless as drunk men, while Carl locked in on their leader's wounded state. Yet Dorothy just couldn't shake the feeling that absolutely nothing was working. Bobson snapped that even after all they'd done, they were still pushing their limits, and the witch just stood there, glaring at her own hand, finally realizing their powers had been completely drained and they were back to square one. Carl finally got the bleeding to stop on his claw, but the harder healing still had to be handled at the clinic. Dorothy keeps grumbling, frustration climbing fast, the moment she recalls what Chloe said back then. "If you're still stuck on the initial level, you can level up again." And he'd gone on and on about how they'd been forcing their way through all this time, only to forget how to fight as real adventurers. She said rat extermination should have been a breeze for a new adventurer, then she spotted Bobson, right away. So Dorothy snapped that he was the problem, not just his fear but his screaming too, which yanked the mice toward them. Dorothy even tried to defend him, saying it wasn't possible anymore, because everyone used to be stronger and could handle it so easily. She remembered the unstoppable support they had, plus those near-limitless healing spells that could erase any injury in seconds. But things changed fast. She jabbed the baseball bat in her grip and said, "This is the only thing I can use right now with my condition, and I'm proving it." Bobson pressed her for exactly what she needed to feel comfortable, and that's when Carl suddenly remembered. This older man never had real willpower to begin with. Back to reality, Dorothy snapped that the guild's taxes were overdue, and she even counted up the unpaid member salaries. The longer they drag their feet, the more debt they'll bury themselves in. She warned them, it won't be long before this country forces you to break up, by dissolving the alliance and ordering you to disband. She was convinced it would slash non-performing loans for real, and finally, the glory-spewing party would reach its end. Carl still remembered that heavy, gloomy silence back then. The guild was thriving, and he truly believed that happiness could go on forever, until life ripped it away in the most heartbreaking way. Dorothy shot back that if Carl had said that back when they were doing great, everyone else would have followed suit. She would have laughed at him. Then, with pure wit, she turned the room into a roar, and only when Claude finally spoke up did the laughter die down. He told them, straight up, it wasn't finished yet, then dove back into how the light of glory could spark anew from nothing. Fildo's group finally made it back safe and sound, and the elves erupted in cheers. So much gratitude poured in that a national holiday was declared. Worn out but finally breathing easy, Phil thanked the elves, and they sent him straight to the palace hot springs. He plunged into the calm waters by himself, soaking it all in while he gawked at the lavish elven architecture and the wild, breathtaking beauty around him. Steam curled around him as he figured out how elves dried their clothes, by using geothermal heat along those stone surfaces. Illamina fed him sweet forest water, and at last Fildo finally exhaled, his body healing in quiet, peaceful silence. Even though Phil looked calm, she suddenly slipped into the bath, shocking him, and everyone watching nearby. Illumina inched up to Phil with a nervous smile, offering to wash his back, even though she couldn't shake the fear she might be crossing a line. She poured out her gratitude, shaky about how she looked, but determined to thank him from the bottom of her heart. Her sister, Lunasia, caught sight of them together and burst in at once, cheeks blazing and completely thrown off by what she just walked into. She demanded to scrub Phil herself, and the steamy bathhouse erupted in chaotic tension. As the two sisters bickered, Phil stayed frozen in silence, caught in the chaos with both of them washing him at once. Lunasia flashed a tender smile as she washed Fildo carefully, and he mumbled his thanks while still trying to hide that flushed, worn-out face. While someone scrubbed his back raw, Fildo's mind snapped back to his loud childhood. Siblings everywhere, shared baths and non-stop noise. Lumasia got lost in memories of that cozy family love, blurted out something straight from the heart, then froze when she realized what she'd just implied. Before anyone could even blink, Phil muttered to himself and suddenly dropped off into a deep sleep, still sitting upright, leaving the girls staring in total shock, utterly speechless. Fildo, now hailed as a hero, was swept up into the celebration and told to dress in ceremonial elven clothes. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then the elves piled on him in a frenzy, insisting they'd dress him up the right way. Fully dressed at last, Phil stepped out, still confused, but totally blown away by the grand hall and its jaw-dropping elegance. He drifted through the crowd solo, feeling tight and out of place, while he kept catching people staring at him, admiration in their eyes, curiosity in their every move. Illumina burst in, grinning wide, praising how he looked, and that radiant, healthy glow proved her recovery was totally finished. While Illumina poured out her gratitude, Fildo's eyes darted all over. Then he noticed it. Lunacious was gone just like that. The Elven King marched right up to Phil, thanked him to the bone, and granted him full leave to celebrate however he wanted. And he dangled a reward for Fildo after saving the forest, way more than Fildo ever thought he'd get. The king thrust a ceremonial brooch into everyone's stunned faces, proof of royal succession, a priceless heirloom that generations kept passing down. He crowned Fildo the nation's savior, and vowed that his deeds would be etched into history forever. The king gripped the brooch tight, and in that instant he felt the crushing weight of what was coming, the change, the duty, the future he'd have to carry. Right in the middle of the ceremony, Fildo got yanked out of nowhere by a stranger. No warning, no words, just an instant grab and pull. Luna bursts out, yanks Fildo onto the dance floor, and insists the hero couldn't possibly stay seated through the whole banquet. Fildo grilled her about her abs, and Lunasis blurted out that her nerves were off the charts, because she was the only human's close partner. Meanwhile, the king clocked Fildo was gone, and he fired questions at Lunasis, worry flashing hard across his face. The king nudged the idea of locking Fildo into a formal role. Then Lunasis snapped him down, calling it a terrible joke. So Lunacia stormed up to her father and demanded that Fildo's power stay with him. No strings, no forced obligation. The king clocked her stance and nodded but told her straight up. Her alliances demanded nerve, not hesitation, and definitely not emotional restraint. Luna's sick of the royal games, and with Fildo by her side, she can't stop feeling the distance between her and her father. Elsewhere, the Order of Knights rides back in full glory, with a towering, thunderous knight commander at the front. Fildo finally realized the knight commander didn't just hold a title. He carried an elite rank, and it made his insane presence click instantly. Level, he shocked the whole crowd with Analyze, an insanely rare ability that exposed everyone's power levels. Phil's friends swarmed him with cheers, and he realized this power wasn't made for fighting. It was a ticket that could boost his odds for future guild recruitment. Everyone leaned in, practically bursting with questions as they demanded their levels. Then Fildo calmly revealed the knight commander's was level 68, and the room exploded with shock and pure green envy. Even with his levels sitting low, Fildo swore he'd share everything he knew, backing his friends just as hard as if it were his full power. That evening, the crew suddenly realized Analyze could unleash stranger, more surprising effects than they'd ever guessed. Someone caught on to Filbo's insane power to pass experience to others, and it sounded just as terrifying as it was unique. Every time the team stayed near Fildo, their experience shot up out of nowhere, and that weird, unsettling feeling hit them like a warning bell. One guy pitched Fildo like a weapon to forge the ultimate guild, and the next one snapped back, defending his independence like it was untouchable. They vowed to shield Fildo because everyone knew he was still a kid, and the wrong hands could twist him into something dangerous. Shock tore through the group when they heard that had suddenly fallen and died. Racked with guilt, Bobson confessed, and that's when Ur's fall erupted while he was fleeing the demons that were closing in. Fildo sobbed in silence, swallowing his power when they told him to hide it, until the day it protected him all the way to death. And he vowed to keep Ur's memory alive, unleashing his gift to forge the strongest guild of all. As the storm of emotions finally calmed, someone shouted, "Fildo," and yanked him out of his heavy, solemn thoughts. He looked lost for a second, but he shot them a smile and swore he was fine as they closed in on that far-off castle. Laughter burst out the moment the younger companion sprinted past everyone, grinning as he loudly claimed his independence and flaunted all that youthful fire. The squad finally reached a towering castle, and just like that, the next chapter of their journey slammed into view. Shoved out of the top guild, Fildo threw himself into solitude and pushed straight into the elven lands, side by side with Linessus. On his journey, he stumbled on a weird lake where glowing fish swirled in silence beneath the surface, like they were guarding a secret. Taking a quick breather in the village, Illumina lit up as she studied the rare fish sitting on the shelf. Illumina leaned in, eyes wide, completely hooked by the creature's shimmering scales and the tank's soft, glowing light. Lunasis spoke softly. Those fish were for sale, not pets, and the aluminum knot tightened as she kept staring, still completely mesmerized. In the roaring market, Illumina hunted for cool accessories while Fildo stayed quiet, lost in thought about his recent travels. A local merchant lit up and praised his transformation, saying Fildo looked like a battle-hardened adventurer right out of the wild. Fildo finally owned up. He didn't change overnight, but every real experience and hard-earned growth rewrote him. A curious vendor spotted his sword, demanded a closer look, and felt it. Something rare and terrifyingly powerful was humming beneath the steel. The craftsman tracked its true origins, probably dwarven, and teased that buried in its gorgeous build were hidden enchantments just waiting to be unleashed. Fildo discovered the truth. Dwarves weren't just miners. They were legendary blacksmiths who enchanted brutal armor and forged weapons that felt unstoppable. Lunasis finally showed just how deep their bond ran with the dwarf country, links they inherited straight from their royal father's powerful connections. Even with dwarf customs running like iron rules, Illuminus still pushed the idea that royal requests could pry open the gates for Fildo's visit. Illumina straight up asked Fildo if he wanted to jump in, and it blindsided him so hard he didn't even see it coming. Without a single second of doubt, the whole crew nodded and took off. Then their next destination, the dwarf country journey, officially kicked into motion. Fildo urged the sisters to hit the city streets while he scouted nearby stores. Lunacius wouldn't let Illuminus' hand go, partly to keep her safe, partly because his feelings were real, warm, and undeniable. Illumina finally broke her silence to Fildo, confessing she was a total mess around him, and her nerves were all over the place. All alone, he wandered through town, until a curious little girl suddenly stepped up to him. She leaned in and asked about monsters and wild adventures, and Fildo shot back a modest reply, grinning because her bold honesty was so impossible to ignore. At the Adventurers Guild, the whole crew got welcomed with open arms by a bubbly receptionist who practically lit up the room with her excitement. The girl slipped out to buy flowers for her mother's birthday, secretly, quietly, while fear of getting caught and punished tightened around her. Fildo spoke to her gently, swearing her mother would forgive her, and that she'd be loved forever for that thoughtful gift. He chuckled softly, tossing the blame onto himself to calm her fears, while the townsfolk nearby watched in warm approval. Fildo mocked the idea of calling the guards, and the second he saw the kid actually believed him. Embarrassment hit hard, so he blurted a quick apology, realizing he'd gone too far. Strolling through the city, Fildo suddenly snapped eyes with that familiar, menacing Claude. Fildo called him out to the crowd, and the two kept their distance, like the air itself was holding on to unfinished history. Mr. Claude sneered at Fildo's fresh start, dragging up his past choices and mocking him non-stop for clinging to Lunacius. He dropped the bombshell that the guild had disbanded, while the others had simply vanished, and that their once feared unit had fully shattered. Fildo stays silent, grinding through the fall of the light of glory, his once trusted guild shattered before his eyes. Fildo finally clocked it. Claude's arrival wasn't some happy accident, because Claude didn't come to reconcile or bring peace. Fildo pushed him to explain, but Claude's fury kept climbing. There was no way this was turning into a calm, peaceful talk. Rage swallowed Claude whole. He pinned his downfall on Fildo, swore vengeance, and charged straight in without a second thought. Fildo snapped into action, caught Claude's blade mid-swing and stared him down, blocking the shock strike with pure resolve. With a furious shout, Fildo hurled Claude back, slamming the brakes on the attack before it could spiral out of control. Claude coughed out a bitter breath and snapped that Fildo was at it again, calling his moves cold, deliberate harassment and an unforgivable betrayal. Bloodied and shaking, Claude finally confessed. He didn't want anything except for Fildo's pain, and in that moment nothing else mattered. Suddenly, Fildo's blood ran cold. He heard a voice right behind him, and the little girl came back, terrified for his safety. Startled, Fildo spun around, too late, because she'd already stumbled straight into incoming danger. Fildo moved like lightning, yanking Faye behind her and slamming the blade away at the last second. Claude bolted into an alley without a second thought, still reeling, stunned out of his mind, but his instincts screamed to chase him down. A hidden trap snapped under Fildo's feet. The ground caved in, and he dropped hard into a spinning pit. Fildo jolted awake, dizzy and lost, and before he could even breathe right, locals surged in to help, while that tiny girl beside him trembled in pure shock. Bob couldn't shake Fildo Rose's resolve, warnings be damned, because Fildo decided to chase Claude straight on, even while Claude was injured. Blood streamed down his face, and Fildo finally understood. His wounds had turned deadly. He fought to stay awake, breathing in tiny gasps, while his hands shook uncontrollably as the shock hit him like a wave. His whole body jerked and convulsed violently. Panic erupted in the streets as the symptoms spiraled, and one brave man frantically tried to calm him down. Bystanders screamed for help as Fildo crumpled even further, choking on painful breaths, while others sprinted off to grab a doctor. Lanicious burst through the crowd, shouting orders at the guards as she reached out, her worry blazing. Worried, she clung to his side like her life depended on it, while Fildo's eyes barely cracked open as Lunasis fought to keep him awake. Leonard clocked the poison's signs on the spot, then shoved a pendant into Fildo's hands and demanded he clamp it tight. Leonard clicked the pendant on, and a surge of pure healing energy blasted out, pouring out life-saving magic like it was meant to save him. Leonard grabbed him steady, and with iron resolve he braced for whatever deadly threat came next after that near-fatal hit. He weakly cracked his eyes open and let out a shaky breath, relief filling his voice as he realized, barely conscious, that his life was spared for now. Claude ripped free from their grasp, then shot into the dark as someone screamed his name at the top of their lungs. Those eyes shot wide with pure terror, pinned there by a brutal memory that ripped back out of the dark. He jolted awake in a blinding, strange room, alone, shaking with a pounding heart, and coughing like smoke had soaked straight into his skin. A sudden noise ripped him out of his thoughts. Footsteps thundered toward him up the wooden staircase nearby. A stranger lit up with a warm greeting, then told him straight. He'd changed Fildo's clothes after finding him knocked out cold. Phil wrestled to remember the man's face, and confusion crashed in, blurring every thought and memory. Leonardo Leonard, the famous Silverblade guildmaster, finally stepped up and introduced himself with a calm, unshakable confidence. With rival guilds hanging in the air, Leonardo handed over water and told everyone straight up that Fildo was down, resting in their guild's infirmary. As Phil sipped carefully, his eyes shot wide the moment he heard it. He'd been out cold for 3 whole days. Leonardo said the poison's grip was finally purged, but Fildo's body still paid a brutal price. Fildo snapped in alarm, demanding to know about the young girl nearby, terrified the poison had reached her. Leonardo calmed him down, saying she was safe, then instantly changed gears, pressing Fildo with why he was suddenly there. As the medic studied him up close, he spilled the truth. This poison was forged from rare, monster-level, venomous ingredients. Phil was left reeling by how twisted that poison was. Most victims didn't make it, and only the elite had access to such a deadly concoction. Leonardo's eyes lit up at Fildo's insane endurance, and when he pushed, Fildo finally confessed his secret power, the point gifter. He couldn't wrap his head around why Claude would ditch someone whose power had lifted an entire guild's name to glory. Leonardo's face turned stone cold with conviction, unlike Claude, and he swore to his bones he'd never cast Fildo aside. When Claude's name popped back up, Fildo finally cracked and admitted, during his months gone, he hadn't heard a single thing. Leonardo dropped a bombshell. Claude was being hunted for murdering 3 executives, crimes that had nothing to do with Fildo's poisoning. Posters snapped the truth into focus. Claude had escaped. And once his obsession with Fildo took over, he started making reckless, irrational moves that screamed one thing: he was terrifyingly dangerous. Leonardo could feel Claude was about to show up, leaned toward Fildo, and fired off a sharp strategy suggestion. Leonardo didn't hesitate. He pulled Fildo into Silverblade on the spot, promising protection and a crushing alliance. Leonardo figured joining a respected guild would put Shield Fildo out of Claude's sights and stop that revenge from turning into a field pursuit. Even with no fuss, Leonardo made it clear that Fildo's talent had already lifted guilds way higher, before Silverblade could squeeze out anything more. Hit with a direct question, Fildo froze. His mind crammed with consequences, and the choice felt like it could crush him. Another guild member stormed in, pushing riches and titles like a weapon, and Fildo got slammed with pure chaos until he couldn't breathe. Hearing the chaos, a bunch of others barreled into the hallway, drawn in by the intense recruitment scene. An armored elf and a hulking brute slammed the door open, only to freeze in shock when they found Fildo awake again. A gigantic shadow suddenly swallowed the room, its shape all wrong, and its terrifying presence made everyone freeze instantly. He snapped the chaos into calm, pushing Fildo a sip of water while the others awkwardly shuffled back and stared, caught in the moment. A bunch of guild members burst in, confused out of their minds, until they caught sight of Fildo wide awake, sitting upright like nothing ever happened. One girl froze mid-step, suspicion snapping in her eyes after she caught Leonardo leaning over the Fild. Tripping over the truth, she burst into an attack, yelling accusations, while Leonardo met every strike with calm, razor-precise deflections. Sparks burst as she loosed her crossbow, and her rage blazed, fed by a brutal misunderstanding that hit way too close to home. Leonardo calmly swatted away the next blow, backing off just enough to keep her from spiraling, urging her to breathe and settle in peace. A bystander cut in and warned her that weapons weren't meant for reckless indoor use, not during a calm, peaceful discussion. With people holding her back, the swordswoman fought tooth and nail anyway, shouting that she wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She just meant to recruit Fildo the right way. Leonardo's laughter tore into her hypocrisy. She claimed she went after Fildo too, right when he was weak and spiraling. He accused her of manipulation, pointing out how she once chased Fildo just for his power. Cornered and trembling, she couldn't find a word as his voice slammed through the silent room, bouncing in her head. Room felt electric as Leonardo guessed the top guilds had clocked Fildo's raw strength and started whispering rumors about his rare power. He made it clear that he wanted Fildo most of all, safely recruiting him as a powerful independent ally. Learning that Leona's mirrors her own choices, she can't shake the doubt that her motives might not be any different at all. Fildo gripped the bedsheet so hard his hands shook, crushed by the thought that both sides might have used him all along. With that surge of resolve, he demanded Leonardo apologize, insisting respect was owed to someone who once genuinely cared. Fildo shot up on edge, clapping back at Leonardo's accusations, and insisting that Leonaces wasn't the kind of person you could casually criticize or mock. Fildo's demand for respect sent emotions surging. He stood up for Leonosis' fight, and he shut down anyone trying to compare it to Claude's betrayal. Leonardo's confident stare cracked just a little, because her fierce loyalty left a mark he never saw coming. Leonardo tried to calm the chaos with a joke, then slipped in a fake half-apology and a smug smirk to keep everyone from snapping. They were furious at his cold indifference, demanding real sincerity, while Fildo just laughed bitterly at the cruel irony. Chaos erupted again when Fildo screamed, unable to swallow the manipulation and the twisted assumptions closing in on him. To stand up for Leonesis, Fildo pushed the idea of a double win, because he knew it would corner Leonardo into issuing a real, formal apology. Leonardo smirked and tossed out his counterterms. If he won, Fildo would fall in line and join Silverblade without a single complaint. Even with protests flying, Filtho folded in and agreed to a term, because all he wanted was respect, not gold or empty promises. Leonardo clocked Fildo's grit, and while his voice softened, pride still burned under that smile. Fueled by pride and pure rage, Filbo slammed his declaration. He vowed to crush Leonardo in fair combat. After days of rest, Fildo braced himself again, locking in and gearing up for the very challenge his comrade had pushed on him. Leonard smirked with unshakable confidence as Blade slid free, his eyes blazing with quiet resolve for the test waiting right in front of him. They stood face to face alone in the training grounds, both knowing one thing: strength would be pushed to the limit, and nobody was going to hold back. Once the battlefield was cleared, secrecy locked in tight, no distractions, just pure focus and skill deciding who won this duel. Inside, the allies stared in tense silence, begging Fildo not to underplay Leonard, no matter how badly they worried about fairness. Fildo got the order to step into the duel with lethal intent, and his raw power was undeniable. Even with his power at the top, everyone stayed on edge, because Leonard, the Silverblade's leader, was a legendary paladin. Leonard swaggered in and demanded the signal. Then when he revealed his level, 96, the crowd went deadly quiet, like everyone's nerves just snapped. A brilliant burst of magic ripped across the sky, screaming that the brutal duel just began, because if you're still breathing, you'll be okay. As Leonard bared his teeth and swore there'd be no mercy, he lunged forward and nailed a blazing, perfectly aimed explosive opener, so fast it hit like a shockwave. He He slammed the block into Phil's swift strike, perfectly timed, eyes locked on him, unshakable. Then the heavy clash exploded and everything suddenly shifted. Finally, Leonard snapped back with insane speed, shoving him backward and leaving him frozen in stunned disbelief at the sheer weight of his pressure. Sure, both of them surged in again, trading savage hits back and forth, and he respected Fildo's strength without a hint of mocking. Leonard's lips curled into a smirk, and this battle instantly blew past every expectation he'd ever set for himself. He inspected the shattered blade with a grin. Fildo's strike had finally carved a real mark, and he showed his real power, 120, then smirked and taunted with that busted sword like it was still enough. Leonard finally admitted he'd been holding back before, and now he understood the truth. Only by unleashing his full strength could he make this work. Without a second thought, Fildo grabbed a top-tier weapon and finally dove into the fight like it meant everything. Leonard lifted a finger and declared a rule so brutal it could crown the winner in a single strike. With a wicked smirk, he claimed the duel would be over in one strike, and that Fildo would crush the fight. He knew he had the body advantage, but he felt Leonard's confidence wasn't coming from muscle. It was running way deeper. Leonard's sudden question cut through the tension. He demanded to know if Fildo had ever truly taken a life. Caught off guard, Fildo blurted that all he'd ever done was fight monsters on escort missions. He'd never killed on purpose, not. Warned him with ice in his voice. Real battles leave scars, and that knowledge can decide whether you live or die. Without a second thought, he snapped a raging vortex of energy into existence, then unleashed his real power with icy, perfect control. Leonard kicked on his speed buff, called Durandal into existence, then shot out of sight in a blink, leaving Phil stunned by the sheer vanishing act. With lightning speed, he slammed into Fildo mid-motion, sneering that he was slow as the impact cracked the ground. As he got flung backward, it hit him. This fight didn't punish raw numbers at all. It was intelligence that truly wrecked adventurers. Then Leonard drove Durandal forward with surgical precision, and his calm experience slammed straight through those battle-honed instincts. Pinned to the cold stone wall, he shook like a leaf. Then he muttered that the only luck was facing just one human instead. Leonard slammed Durandal's power buff on, barreling at Phil with pure rage, so fast Phil could barely even process the threat. A brutal swing whistled right by Fildo's head. He snapped his guard up at the last second, proving to Leonard that his reflexes were lightning fast. The paladin vanished again. He stumbled back with eyes bulging, crushed by yet another impossible burst of speed. Sword clenched in his grip, Fildo forced himself to stay calm, because this had to be a trick. That sharp voice sliced right through the tension, dropping the weight of his thoughts mid-battle like it was nothing. Leonard boldly bragged that Durandal could crank up strength, and mid-fight Fildo snapped, questioning if he was even telling the truth. Even after he exposed his power, he still crushed Fildo, showing that raw knowledge alone couldn't beat his overwhelming edge. Fildo fought tooth and nail against Durandal's crushing weight, but every time he tried to strike back, the opening just wouldn't show up. Leonard surged in again, unstoppable momentum driving him forward, his blade pinning Fildo back into a wobbly, shaky stance. He took a direct hit on the chin, shrugged it off with a low chuckle, and joked mid-fight about how clumsy his footwork looked. Worried eyes lock onto the brutal fight as Illumina and her ally Sans fight harder, yet everything keeps getting worse. A sudden blast slammed Illumina backward. She yelped as violent shockwaves ripped through the ground. Leonard blurted an apology mid-swing, admitting he totally lost control, while Fildo barely managed to shield Syrah from the fallout. Illumina hurled a support spell, sending Erwin to reposition, because she couldn't believe Fildo was getting crushed this badly. They quickly clocked his fighting style. His buffs hit with explosive raw strength, and he storms past Fildo in pure power. When everyone caught on to Leonard's adaptability, they realized he wasn't just dangerous. He was unpredictable, nothing like a beast, and even his moves were impossible to read. At the royal court, they paraded him in front of everyone, guildmaster of the elite Silverblade. After the duel, someone slid him secret orders: handle Fildo's fate quietly and keep it buried. Leonard stood over the wounded man in the moonlight, staring as his breaths came out thin and shallow. The guild rushed word that he was in critical condition, and they made it crystal clear. They wouldn't move him unless they could guarantee it wouldn't wreck him even more. With a calm smirk on his face, Leonard stepped up and accepted the challenge. Tomorrow's chaos was going to start with him. Even pinned to the bed, he stayed razor alert, because wherever his name went, disaster chased right after, and this was only the beginning. Assassins argued over their orders right there. Some wanted to quietly remove him and end it, Others feared it would ignite a whole new war. Whispers about Claude Strick's leadership hit like a bombshell, and people couldn't believe he'd actually toss out someone so loyal and dedicated. Fildo's sudden expulsion hit everyone like a punch, and the lack of any official procedure made it clear something far darker was going on. Speculation exploded. People couldn't decide if she miscalculated, or if she cut Fildo loose on purpose like she was setting up something huge. A wild theory hit Leonard Midoff like a bolt of lightning. He flashed a shaky grin, then clammed up, and the tension started to crush the air around him. Even with everyone screaming against it, the plan still took root. And once he really thought it through, regret hit him hard for even dreaming up something this reckless. Leonard weighed every option in his head, and bringing Fildo into the guild, no matter how messy everything looked, could rewrite the guild's entire future. They argued it out step by step, because raw strength alone wasn't going to cut it. His attitude and loyalty to you were what truly mattered. His grin turned razor-sharp. If Fildo slipped into danger, they'd move instantly to take him down. Everyone else felt it too, pure exhaustion weighing them down, because surviving meant running from threats that were always stronger than they could ever be. Marie trembled, her voice cracking, because Fildo's potential wasn't just powerful, it was downright terrifying. The duel kicked off like a death sentence. Phil slammed his blades together and sparked pure shock as his overwhelming speed left his opponent reeling. Everyone watching gasped as her eyes snapped wide, and the instant his power hit, it crushed every expectation. A deadly counterattack snapped in at full speed, but Phil lunged on instinct, narrowly twisting out of the blade's path. Steel clashed against steel as their weapons locked up tight, and neither fighter even blinked at the fight ahead. She dodged upward and slammed into him with a brutal strike. Phil stumbled back a step, feeling the power of every hit. Filda got blasted backward by the impact, crashing through dirt and grass as she tumbled, utterly stunned by the brutal force that hit her. The opponent froze mid-stance, staring at the impact like it stunned them, because it landed way harder than they expected, and real concern flickered across their face. From behind the bushes, he stumbled out, bruised and gasping, yet he still swallowed his pride to admit how strong she was. Leonard shot back seriously, basically explaining what he meant by the praise, but Phil, still totally dazed, couldn't tell if it was real or just biting sarcasm. Even though it hurt like hell, he dug in and stood his ground. This damage wasn't fatal, and he hadn't even let loose with his full strength yet. He clocked Fildo's perception. Those sharp eyes tracked every move like they could see the future. Phil studied Leonard's fighting pattern, and the real secret hit him. Leonard changed enhancement modes mid-swing. If he kept his focus locked in, he was sure he could ride Leonard's ever-changing rhythm and stay right on pace. Timing was everything, and Phil, ready for his move, waited for the perfect moment during Hymex's shift in physical enhancement. At the instant the opening appeared, he surged forward. If he was right, this next strike would finally hit home. Phil slammed his strike to a stop just inches from landing, and Leonard clocked the restraint at once, eyes narrowing like he'd figured him out. Even with his restraint, they still called him soft, and his opponent didn't hesitate for a second, testing him right away. He blinked at the sudden counter, and it hit him. This match wasn't finished yet. Pinned to the ground and stripped of his gear, he was hauled in for questioning, because gear alone could never survive a real battle. Leonard slammed down a rule. One clean hit, and it's victory. Too bad mercy isn't even in this world. An enemy struck out of nowhere with lightning speed. He and Fildo yanked themselves back, but the whole courtyard buzzed with deadly tension. Phil clenched his sword tight, but the earlier clash still swirled his vision. Everything went blurry. Even while he fought through the pain, the opponent would not back down. He dug in and crushed forward with sheer brute force. Fildo tried to back away and think things through, but the strain crushed his legs and he just crumpled. Leonard tore in with a blinding strike, and once his vision went fuzzy, there was zero way for anyone to counter. With bruises soaking in but his spirit unbroken, he surged ahead. No surrender, not even with those crushing odds glaring right in front of him. Because forbidden techniques are a ticking bomb in his hands, he froze. Some skills were too deadly to unleash where people could get hurt. He knew Leonard wouldn't waste a second. He'd already decide on the spot, fight or bolt. Respect started to grow in Phil's chest, and he realized that joining his guild wasn't as crazy as it sounded. Even with all that admiration aimed at him, he clenched his jaw and refused to back down. His dreams burned hotter than fear or pain. Water erupted around him, and Fildo snapped into a new position fast, eyes locked on Leonard's stance across the field. Right in the middle of the chart, he leaned into his final gamble, then unleashed his second X skill with pure focus. Sword held high, he screamed Avalon. Holy energy slammed into the battlefield and wrapped him in a blazing shield. A memory kept resurfacing in the middle of dead-end jobs, and with every day, it exposed a buried longing to break free from just surviving on autopilot. Now it was crystal clear. He had to leave that powerless version of himself in the past, no matter what. Phil blurted out his real desire, and even as Leonard smiled gently, he still nodded like Phil's choice deserved full respect. Both fighters exploded forward together, blades crashing in a thunderous clash, pure conviction driving them, not just brute force. A desperate young girl barrels into the Grand Guild Hall, gasping that she needs her brother's whereabouts, like she's on a countdown. Inside, she catches a guild member and learns that Fildo isn't here. He's not currently around. They tell her he's training outside, then lay out the directions to the right building, straight ahead. Inching along the directions by herself, she suddenly snapped her head up, because a strange noise hit and a bouncing ball popped up right nearby. She barges into the room and freezes when she spots a man in horrifying condition, crumpled under the desk and trembling like he's hanging on by a thread. The wounded man screamed like hell, his whole body crushed by agony as crystals shredded through him. Elsewhere, drenched in Nelton exhaustion, his sword stuck upright in the water as his breath crashed heavy after that brutal fight. He snapped back in panic, begging himself to know if his attack actually landed, but all he could cling to were shattered flashes of memory while the fight still raged. Visibility vanished, panic surged, and he feared that reckless strike had pushed him way too far. Out of nowhere, Leonard snapped back to life, blazing with cheers as he grabbed Phil in a tight embrace, admiration pouring out because Phil's strength was just too overwhelming. Leonard lurched ahead, loudly praising Phil's tactics while the hot sting from his barely healed injury kept flaring up anyway. He laid out his plan, showing how the river's depth and the swallowed noise hid his perfect final position. As they sat there thinking, they mapped it out, how the ground would control their timing and crush their visibility, especially with no water left to hide their movements. Leonard admitted he saw the trap coming, because the moment the attack started, he expected to snatch the sword for a laugh. Erupted between them as he laughed at Fildo's reckless plan to disarm him mid-fight. Then he sat there, staring. He sank into shame and offered a heartfelt apology, while Leonard realized the tension between them had finally evaporated. Leonard leaned in and reassured him, reminding him why they were fighting in the first place, and sealing it with a bold promise that Fildo could be a deadly comrade. Fildo felt sick with regret, admitting his powers were never meant to harm anyone. He was supposed to protect the people around him, not lose control. Stunned by Leonard's sudden move, Fildo looked up, and there it was. Forgiveness handed out instantly with no judgment at all. He swallowed his pride, owned up to his mistake, and realized Fildo's fury wasn't about spite. It was loyalty to a friend he'd trust with his life. Fildo fought through trembling tears, forcing himself to stay standing because Lenosis's real importance was too powerful to fall apart. Lenosis showed up nearby, flashing a quiet signal that she wasn't just there for company. She carried something deeper for Fildo. Right then, another figure crashed down with a brutal thud, shocking the crowd, right as Leonard was handed a healing potion. He froze before speaking, eyes flashing back to that moment when his calm mask barely hid the storm of doubt underneath. With everyone reeling, Leonard finally showed his blade's secret, the immortal sword, and just like that, it wiped out the damage from earlier. As Durandal's power flared, he sliced. Those fingers instantly blasted into steam, yet they started regenerating right there in midair. With total confidence, he proved the blade could erase any wound, plain and simple, leaving him healed to perfection. He told me Durandal doesn't just bring people back, it supercharges you too, which is why it's the perfect weapon for combat trials. Meanwhile, Lenosis talked about a jaw-dropping find. Someone had sliced a terrifying new creature clean in half. Leonard fused the destructive light pillar with his blades, locking in the proof that he was behind that whole incident. He made it clear he recruited Fildo on purpose, because he knew their swords were tied together by some mysterious bond. A brutal flashback tore open Leonard's past. He'd been shoved and pressured by others, yet he swore Fildo's decision had to stay free. Lenosis slammed down neutrality, making it clear that Fildo's call in the fight was his alone to decide. He swallowed his impatience and cracked a joke as he bought a potion, then watched the crowd heap praise on him for being unexpectedly kind. She stepped forward with poise, calling herself the Sword Saint, and that single introduction screamed that her mission wasn't just to heal. It was something bigger, something deeper, and she was ready to push it forward. And Lenosis finally bowed and apologized for how she acted earlier, while Leonard admitted he'd been using Fildo's battle strengths to his advantage. Before he could even answer, Linicius swore she'd repay her debt, then struck him with sudden, rock-solid determination. He called her a benefactor, but everyone else froze, because the stories about how they're connected didn't match at all. Tearful Thildo blurted that she'd kept an old promise, and though her loyalty came out hot and angry, it was really gratitude burning underneath. He couldn't help but think, adventurers don't get many second chances, and if you wait too long, your voice might never be heard again. Fildor stared into his own overconfidence, and finally realized those monster winds never trained him for human fighters with real skill. Right then, he finally admitted it. One real fight would have ended with his life snuffed out instantly. Just as Leonard started doubting his own progress, a sudden call slammed into his thoughts and cut off his reflection. The terrifying enemy burst into view, and Fildo had to face a parasite-riddled attacker. No hesitation, just raw survival. Linicius slammed forward with a speed boost, landing a brutal hit on the monster before it could even reach Filda. He stormed up to Claude, jaw clenched, and threatened to hurt him until Claude finally spilled the truth about his past involvement. She spilled the truth, confessed to using illegal poison, and admitted she killed the Light of Glory executive. The Fildo's sword etched with ancient markings didn't just catch attention. It screamed that something way deeper was going on, while everyone else shrugged it off and laughed. Accusations slammed in the moment she knowingly handed the sword over, fully aware of what it truly meant. Leonard realized they'd been hiding the truth from him, his shock roaring when he saw she'd kept the vital facts about Fildo locked away. She mocked them and right in the middle of it, dragged up his old power as the former Guildmaster, sparking instant backlash from Fildo's ally, Lena. Linicius didn't hold back. She was crushed, because she'd once truly believed Claude had the drive to rise above arrogance. Right as she was talking about the custody transfer, danger suddenly lunged in from behind Leonard, shocking everyone to the bone. Claude hit with a brutal surprise attack on the spot, and Linocius had to slam up a guard mid-sentence just to survive it. He laid out his plan for the deadly artifact, and no matter what anyone believed, it was going to wipe out every single person. Everyone went stone still as Claude snapped the artifact to life, and a towering structure slammed up from the ground, piercing the sky like a dark omen. A colossal black spire plunged down, and right then, catastrophe wasn't coming anymore. It was already here, and the worst-case scenario was finally breaking into reality. A demonic dragon plunged from the sky, and panic exploded. Yet Fildo planted his feet and shielded the terrified elven sisters behind him. The beast's summoning tore through the city. Tornadoes erupted on the spot, screaming that total destruction was already in motion. Fildo's calculations crumpled mid-thought. His face turned stone cold as he realized this creature blew past every magical limit he'd predicted. Two warriors crumpled in defeat, and everything their pursuit of the truth about Fildo had set in motion had slammed them straight into ruin. From shattered ground, Fildo launched forward, energy blazing around him as someone's voice tore through shaking breaths, screaming his name. Across broken stone, the enemy kept mocking him, until he finally revealed himself as Fildo's estranged older brother, acting like pity was all he had. The brother stared straight at Fildo's heart, insisting that his cruelty was just a cold childhood turned into rage. Fildo went utterly silent. Those words punched straight into his heart, and the painful guidance from that twisted monster came roaring back. He didn't answer with emotion. He answered with raw power, and a brutal massive summon thundered down, declaring death blind to everyone. Just before the divine strike landed, another warrior lunged in, shocked for a second, then braced to take the hit and shield it. As rubble caved in, beams slammed into the ground, right as Fildo's ally burst forward and barely dodged a death blow. With his body pinned down and injured, the rescuer groaned through the pain, blood pouring from his wounded arm as it. With a steady look, he reassured Fildo. Though he knew Fildo could have handled it alone, he stepped in instantly, no second thoughts. Leonard snapped back to consciousness, and even as his recovery crawled, he blurted, "Bahamut," because the summoned beast was already charging in their direction. Fildo narrowed his eyes as he listened. Bahamut, the chaos-born beast, had busted out of the sealed shrine and hit the surface. They analyzed the skill and found secret power tiers, but the levels were totally off. Some monsters hid crushing strength like it was nothing. Shock ripped through him the moment it clicked. This encounter wasn't just off, it felt terrifyingly different. Bahamut loomed above everyone, colossal and deadly silent, and the status screen snapped to life, level 200, way beyond anything anyone had ever recorded. A's gleamed in the dark, and countless pupils snapped onto their spot, tracking every tiny twitch like it mattered. His mouth gaped wider than his whole body, and panic hit him so hard he knew he'd already waited too late. Dread crashed over him, muscles seized, thoughts shattered into panic. This wasn't instinct at all. Terror turned real, and frenzied voices hammered through his mind. Survival, allies, hope. Yet none of it could crack a single answer against that crushing threat. A sudden clap ripped through the panic. Gloved hands snapped together, yanking him out of spiraling fear like a shock to the soul. Tension finally loosened, and one person breathed a prayer, while the other stared in shock as confusion got drowned out by courage. The slap hit soft, controlled, and for a heartbeat everything felt okay. Relief crashed in, the shock drained away, and the enemy just blinked, utterly thrown by how calm it all suddenly was. Leonard shoved an artifact into his hands. Once the evacuation was done, there was just one last job left: wipe out the threat. A faint glow pulsed in his palm as that ancient necklace whispered a promise: protection against any corrupting magic trying to sink its claws into him. Then that suffocating, paralyzing pressure vanished, like it was all a trick, because Bahamut's terror, sparked by Leonard's gaze, was the only thing holding it together. He didn't let doubt creep in. He barked out orders, then marched straight toward a looming showdown by himself. Dust blasted up around him, and with a fierce smile on his face, Leonard stood ready, because this time he wasn't playing around. Then a focused beam blasted out of Bahamut's mouth, ripping through stone and smashing everything in its path. Instead of backing off, he flashed a savage grin. Energy surged in his eyes like it was itching to strike back. Armor sizzled under the heat. His cape streamed flames, and Leonard sprinted straight ahead, dead set on closing the gap at once. Bahamut snapped into motion, sensing trouble, as magic rings ignited and fired a storm of intercepting blows straight downward. Leonard's momentum snapped. He slammed to the ground, furious. Bahamut gloated, certain there was no way out now. Power surged through him. Durandal roared to life, his gaze nailed straight ahead. He made one move, and every stat spiked for full throttle output. A blinding charge detonated into motion. Bahamut braced at the last second, but an energy slash cleaved straight through its wing. Even with the damage, those scales refused to break. He clamped down on his teeth, shocked by the resistance but staying in the fight. Momentum flipped in an instant. Leonard surged forward as the blade whirled, pushing so hard he aimed to shatter Bahamut's defenses for good. Battered and bruised, Bahamut staggered as relentless pressure cracked through his defenses. Hope surged for a win, then the light blazed up again. The strike landed clean, but the armor swallowed most of it. Then his face snapped tight with pure, furious disbelief. Bahamut snapped into action. Its tail whipped across the stone and detonated on impact, blasting the whole area into smoke that only then began to clear. Leonard and his sword got pinned in place, and scorching heat plus crushing pressure shattered the debris around him in a frantic burst. Glant yanked his gaze up, charging orbs hurled toward him. One wrong move left him wide open, and his breath died in his throat. Options evaporated, and a surge of energy slammed into him. No escape left, just everything ripping into blur, light, and raw force. Shard scraps scattered as Fildo surged ahead. Then a shimmering barrier flared up, catching the strike meant to smash Leonard. Frustration surged, and his orders got ignored. Yet that reckless move somehow lit up a surprising spark inside the veteran. Word spilled fast. Fildo sputtered out an apology, swore he'd stay no matter what, and stepping back was suddenly impossible. Confidence blazed out of him as he pushed past every injury, and he promised Leonard he wouldn't crack no matter how hard the pressure hit. Two blades rise at once, purpose clicks into place, and they brace to cut down the strongest enemy still breathing. A legendary dragon crashes into the world, right as Fildo throws himself beside the armored knight, gearing up for a mission that reeks of death. Citizens sprint through streets that are crumbling beneath their feet. Miguel takes control, barking orders, and herding survivors away from the dragon's fury. Then bam, debris hammers down from above, screams explode everywhere, and panic races through the packed alleyways. Miguel lunges forward and throws himself in front of a child, while the wizard surges to his feet, channeling magic to blunt the enemy's brutal assault. As chaos erupts, they start asking who the dragon really is. Then the blame lands on Bahamut, the nightmare they fear the most. Smoke curls up as Miguel stares at the burning wreckage. Then he hears it loud and clear. Evacuate first, stand by, and wait for the results. Mid shattered stones, the priestess hacks and coughs while her companion lies unconscious nearby, trapped under a pile of rubble. When she spots the fallen warrior and realizes it's her own sister, panic slams into her chest as she bolts forward. Steel screamed as the knight surged ahead, every clash hammering the dragon's attention, pulling it away from the civilians scrambling to escape behind him. The dragon's roar rips through the air, and a fearless fighter dives in from above, blade bared for the killing strike. With clenched teeth, Fildo charges the enemy's force, unleashing raw power while his blade stays razor-perfect. The dragon snaps back instantly. Every slash heals shut right before they can even land the next hit, restoring itself faster than they can strike. The dragon snaps back instantly. Every slash heals shut right before they can even land the next hit, restoring itself faster than they can strike. Their laughter turns into dread as they watch the beast regrow piece by piece. But one thing has to be wrong, and it's probably coming from above. Destruction rips through everything, and with their last shred of hope, a final healing potion is shoved into their hands. Order's shift hit the moment those powers came alive, and when Ally's target locked onto the wings, he had to rip straight into the core. Flames burst out of the wreckage as Fildo roars Illumina, and barrels through the collapsing rubble, blade clenched tight. A glowing barrier unfurls as Lily's veil snaps awake, blasting her allies with divine light and sealing them from the crushing doom ahead. Even with the spell roaring, the pressure keeps climbing. Lily digs in and fights to hold a defensive wall that's coming down from above. Fildo screams for them to run. Then the blast slams down, blasting the ground to pieces under their feet. Dust hangs for a second, then one of his comrades staggers in, breathless, swearing Fildo's still alive, while everyone can feel danger lurking right around the corner. Above the shattered battlefield, Bahamut cuts through the sky, and Fildo realizes they've got to sprint to its position, already in the air before it's too late, airborne turn. He whips around to the priestess and begs for wind magic, so he can blast up to Bahamut's height in record time. Wind whips around them as they climb into the sky, and panic rises. Airborne fight was never supposed to happen. Enchanted by dark magic, the night roars to life as it swells upward, while the dragon crouches in silence, power coiled tight behind its wings, just waiting to strike. Blades strike barely a scratch. Bahamut's scales braced and he deflected the blows, leaving one last chance, aiming for the core from below. The priestess thrusts her energy up into the sky, and even as her body trembles, her resolve doesn't budge. Suddenly, a dark force locks her in place. Terror sparks in her eyes as her magic stutters mid-cast under the crushing pressure. Fildo and the Night Stagger hang up above, and the dragon's aura blasts out a terrifying fear spell that makes your blood run cold. Urgent cries cut through the night. Every strike they launch just slams into Bahamut's defenses, and nothing breaks through. Fear slithers through everyone like poison, and the priestess's hands start to tremble hard, her will buckling under a crushing force she can't even see. Magic spirals out of control, and then, boom, an explosive blast tears across the battlefield, shattering focus and breaking the formation wide open. Smoke gushes out of Leonard's armor, collapsing into rubble as the cliffs loom above. He can barely breathe, wounded and totally defenseless. She sees him from across the field, and the priestess bursts into a cry. Shock and terror slam into her trembling heart. Bursting out of the crater, Bahamut barrels forward, while Fildo lies frozen in shock, staring at the end coming for him. Strength snaps back in a heartbeat. Fildo clenches his fist and rockets upward as rubble erupts all around him. Bahamut rockets forward with its jaws gaping, and Fildo barely slips out of the way, trapped between broken rubble and the dragon's crushing claws. Fildo and Bahamut snap eyes at each other. Then the priestess shrieks his name, terrified she's seconds away from watching death unfold. From out of the dark, she rockets forward in full armor. Her strike erupts in brilliant light, slicing straight into Bahamut's flank with pure divine power. Wounded, she lunges forward and collapses, and right then her younger sister barrels in, staring as corruption swirls all around Bahamut. Dark orbs of energy spiral outward, and the name Lily lodges in her sister's throat, like something about to snap, and she knows it. Explosions rip through the shattered earth, and the priestess gets slammed backward, no protection, fully exposed. Through tears, she screams as her sister crumples to the ground while Bahamut's dark energy surges, growing stronger by the second. Energy without hesitation. Fildo rockets forward, vaulting between the dragon and the priestess, throwing his body in front of every blast while he clutches her close and won't let go. He takes the hit without flinching. Light dies behind a wall of wreckage. Then she leans close and breathes his name. Fildo crashes down hard, bloodied but unbroken, quietly refuses to speak, and mumbles softly like a secret. Fildo holds him close, and in the weak glow of night he barely smiles. Then he pours magic into himself to ease the pain. She blurts out an apology for coming up short, and before his injury can slow him down, Fildo grabs the potion and forces it onto her. Fildo rises back up, clamps his sword in hand, and even with his body screaming from exhaustion, he finally spots his shot to win. The sky tore open as the enemy dropped from above, and Illumina froze, sinking into the blame that it was all her fault. Defeated to the bone, she crumpled to the ground, and the regret burned so hot it felt like it was staining her sister too, left behind, useless too. To Master Fildo. Fildo burst in and snatched Illumina, and her apology died on her lips as he shoved her to keep fighting. When their moment finally hit, Lunasus's sacrifice ripped the secret open. Suddenly the shadows wavered, the monster reeled, and it was staring right at its own weakness. Fildo roared with steel in his voice. There was one final push left, and together they were going to finish this no matter what. That brutal strike shattered the creature's armor, and right then, right under its chest, the weak spot finally showed itself. Fildo didn't hesitate. He shot upward with his blade out, racing in before the monster even had time to react. With pinpoint control, he dropped low just in time, narrowly slipping away from a blast while smoke hid the beast's raging fury. The enemy barreled in with a massive attack, and Leonard burst forward, sprinting while calling Fildo and clocking that deadly delay in the charge. Leonard demanded a fast strategy, and urgency burned behind his eyes, because this battle wasn't going to slow down for anyone. Fildo's fury blazed in his voice as he shouted that he'd obliterate the monster's head completely. Leonard lunged forward without a second thought, voice iron steady. He swore he'd back Fildo's final strike with his own body. Others backed off, letting Fildo take the lead, and he steadied his aim with fearless focus, shoving down his fear as he locked onto the battered target that still refused to quit. She pushed Fildo to go all out. No brakes, no hesitation, unleashing everything. The enemy shot back into the sky, and those narrowed eyes snapped onto it instantly. He wasn't letting it slip away twice. Illumina surged ahead, dead set on never getting fooled again, her grip clenched tight, eyes blazing with iron resolve. Winds howled around her, and suddenly the past snapped back to life. Her power, once shaky and unsure, finally burst into bloom through what she'd shared. A violent storm of petals and blades detonated through the air, and Illumina's magic surged as she drove Fildo straight at their flying enemy. Her level exploded with raw power. Illumina wasn't just support anymore. She turned into a force all on her own. Tears streamed down her face, but the fear snapped. She roared with total conviction, charging forward as magic flared in pure defiance. The beast's eyes bulged with terror as razor-sharp vines stabbed through its armored hide from every direction. Wind howled all around them as Fildo burst through the whirlwind, landing rapid strikes before the creature could even regroup. Leonard burst into the chaos, flying in for a brutal aerial strike while his teammates kept the monster pinned and distracted below. Leonard's strike missed, the enemy sneered and blood splattered down, then pain crashed through him like lightning. An explosive counterattack detonated like a nightmare. Dust and scorching heat swallowed everything whole, leaving no clue who, if anyone, survived that blast. Leonard barreled in, wild-eyed and laughing through the agony, and even as bloodied and broken, he shoved himself into a critical decoy role. With his sword held high, Fildo crashed through the storm like a comet, ready to finish it all with one last, decisive blow. By studying every past attack, Fildo pinpointed the monster's hidden weak spot, lurking right by that glowing throat. He slammed in with ruthless force, yelling like he already knew it would work. Then the enemy's core finally pulsed into the open, exposed and helpless. Every so often, intense silence snapped the air. Then rubble shifted as Illumina murmured, fighting to believe her eyes that Fildo's last strike had actually landed. Crackling spread under his boots as the cloaked warrior lifted his blade, ready to land a fatal strike. The monster sneered and laughed, only to realize the attack had already cracked its defenses at the one spot that mattered. Blood soaked the ground and exhaustion crushed their bones, but the team fought through it anyway, carving out an opening, razor-thin and barely visible without. Without hesitation, he slammed into the weak spot again, bellowing like a cannon as the debris detonated outward in a violent burst. The core buckled under the relentless assault as Fildo's face hardened. He raised his stance, ready to drive in that final thrust. Pressure kept cranking up, but the blade still wouldn't bite deep enough, and the energy exploded outward from the hit. Bahamut jerked back, its head shrieking with pure agony, as the counterattack surged forward and slammed more space between them again. Confusion hit like a wave, and his magic energy stayed dangerously low. His ultimate technique was still locked away from him for now. They blurted out the answer fast, Holy Breaker needs power, but no one was saying they had to land a perfect finish yet. Bahamut's core stayed visible and solid, so with every other choice gone, the only move left was to weaken it even more. Rubble burst into the air as brutal shockwaves crashed into the ground, and everyone threw themselves down just in time to dodge disaster. Retreat looked like the smart move, but he hesitated for one beat, and then the monster surged forward again with a crushing roar. Power exploded in his chest. Then he sprang into the air, weapon in hand, and slammed down with everything he had on one final, desperate strike. Blade screamed under the pressure, resistance rising with every heartbeat, and he clenched his jaw hard, refusing to let go. Their confidence cracked. Resentment burned at having to lean on borrowed power, but there was no other choice left. Reluctantly, he lifted his arm. Ultimate energy surged skyward like it was breaking every rule. And this forbidden move had always been a hard line he wasn't allowed to cross, Khan. Confused faces snapped upward, and that surge of energy slammed into their allies, rattling the battlefield ruins and even distant cities. Thousands of lifetimes of battle wisdom surged upward, then got slammed into one single warrior. Nope, like particles swirled around his body, and the chaos erupted the instant Bahamut snapped back to life. The sky cracked open above him, raw power blasted through his body. His stats shot up in seconds, and the legend kicked off right where everything was about to fall apart. Everything was set for this one brutal moment. Then the sword shot forward, straight for Bahamut's exposed core. Dust tore through the air as a massive crater ripped into the city, swallowing half of it whole. While on the rim, a soldier froze in horror, his mind locked on the wreckage where his family used to live. The guards huddled up, bracing for impact as a shadowy force crept closer, and the nation's strongest warrior stood ready, because he was their final line of defense. Suddenly, the sky tore open. Then a hulking darkness slammed into the fortress, blasting debris everywhere and rattling the ground beneath them. Amid the rubble, the creature thrashed in raw, visible pain, and its power surged through every brutal movement. Before anyone could catch their breath, it lunged forward again. Soldiers reeled back, panic pounding their chests as that roar promised the next wave of destruction. A dark shadow tore across the battlefield as that lone fighter slammed down on top of the beast, cracking the ground on impact and screaming that the fight had just taken a wild turn. Far beyond the walls, the ground buckled under a savage tremor. Then the kingdom snapped into panic, finally realizing the monster they'd just woken up was on a whole different scale. Back in the day, there was a monster people feared more than anything: Bahamut, an ancient dragon so powerful it once reshaped continents and toppled nations, and that was over 1,000 years ago. Now the brutal battle hit its final phase. Wings ripped through the sky, shredding the clouds with pure, violent energy. Even so, that colossal dragon, pure power, still shook in terror, scared of just one human. The dragon's whole body shuddered as a blade punched through its dark scales. No panic in its eyes, just instant recognition. Then the past came rushing back. Clear memories of the man who sealed it away resurfaced, and he was still there in your mind, gripping the same sacred blade, Excalibur. A blinding light tore open the sky, slicing through clouds and darkness like they didn't matter. And boom, some forgotten power finally woke up. The dragon let out a thunderous roar, thrashing so hard the earth split under the pounding of its waves. Through the last wisps of smoke, a lone fighter stepped forward, calm as a blade, steady, unshaken, and ready to shut this battle down again. Fildo slammed into the ground, his whole body screaming with pain as the fall stole the air from his lungs. Then dust surged around him while he fought to move. Lying flat, he realized, somehow, he'd survived. Pain spread across his back, but the rush of being alive steadied his breath. Right before he could even breathe, a colossal shadow slammed over him. The dragon had risen again, its claws ripping through the ground like it was nothing. The ground shook hard as Fildo hauled himself upright, and every breath ripped his strength away. He craned his head up and froze under those massive jaws where the fangs were poised to slam into him. The ground ripped open with a brutal jolt as lightning tore through the cracks, and Fildo's whole body seized up while raw power blasted outward, rattling the battlefield. Out of the chaos, a knight in shining armor slammed into the dragon with brutal force, and the shockwave boomed through the air. Knight surged forward without fear, weapon blazing like a flare. His power hit the creature's fury head-on, but those calm eyes screamed experience that went way beyond anything it could touch. Watching in silence, the knight spotted the same impossible glow he'd seen back then. Then it hit him like thunder. Fildo's point gifter power, unmistakable as fate itself. The dragon's voice thundered through the ruins, roaring with pure hatred, while the knight clutched his blade, feeling the final strike of an ancient grudge that had finally come back. As the dragon's last words ripped through the battlefield, resentment curdled in the air, its final breath carrying the taint of a traitor's bloodline at his throat, swearing vengeance before its body dissolved into pure darkness. Silence crashed in the moment the monster hit the ground. Leonard froze in place, eyes locked on the last shadows slipping away, praying the threat was really over. Right beside him, Fildo crumpled, battered from head to toe, bleeding and broken. His companions barreled in beside him, and relief crashed into panic the moment they saw he was breathing. Barely, while bloodied and wrecked. After a fast check, the knight told them Fildo's life wasn't on the line, even though his toughness felt almost unreal. With teeth clenched, Leonard hoisted Fildo onto his shoulder, and he could already feel the dreaded report from this brutal battle looming ahead. Tension crackled in the air as the elf stepped forward, voice steady but unshakable. She demanded that Leonard hand Fildo over to her, then insisted they had to leave the country right now. Leonard saw Fildo as a true hero who deserved honor, not hiding in secrecy, and the way he cut down the dragon made recognition feel like the only reward that fit. She warned that fame doesn't just glow, it can turn dangerous fast, so the savior might get labeled a threat instead. Leonard clenched his weapon tighter, and defiance blazed in his eyes, while the elf's calm smile never even flickered as she tested how far his resolve would go. She didn't hesitate, blade out in a fierce slash in the air like, "Enough talk," because Fildo's fate would be decided by pure force. Leonard shocked the whole room by agreeing on the spot. No hesitation, no doubts, and with a cocky smirk he shoved Fildo into Fildo's hands, leaving the elf stunned and suddenly unable to speak. With gratitude burning in her chest and nerves snapping at her heels, she thanked him and swore she'd tell the king everything, while their companion grumbled that once that dragon mess hit the capital, he'd be buried in endless paperwork. Right before they set off, Leonard couldn't stop thinking about Fildo's mysterious gift, the power to hand out and supercharge experience points. Even the elf swallowed hard and admitted it. Those powers could topple and reshape nations if nobody stopped it, and that terrifying thought sent a wave of unease through the whole group. Even with fear breathing down their necks, Leonard brushed it off with a calm, confident smile. Leonard stood before the crumbling fortress, his cloak snapping in the wind, and with unshakable confidence he swore that Fildo would hunt down the silver blade one day. Meanwhile, Fildo's companion held him close and promised, "I won't step in, I'll stand by your every choice." Right before Leonard could leave, one of Fildo's allies burst forward and shouted, handing him a tiny object she'd risked everything to keep safe through the fight. The knight's eyes softened the moment he recognized it, the necklace of banishing evil, an unstoppable charm forged to drive darkness back where it belongs. He wouldn't budge for a second and swore that Fildo was the one who owned it. Leonard let out a weary sigh and flashed a tired smile, already bracing for the brutal questions waiting for him at the royal court as he said. Right as his team geared up to leave, a brand new record started cracking open in the sky, year 1332 on the kingdom's calendar. Even though the attack sparked panic, it didn't go far. The damage stayed trapped inside the training grounds, and the dragon's wreckage never spilled into the city, saving it from total ruin. After the dust settled, Leonard and the Silver Blades got hailed for their pure courage. Boom, their names rang through the palace halls as the whole nation celebrated their victory. But behind that win, one brutal mystery stayed. The man accused of calling Bahamut Claude Glamatics simply disappeared, leaving zero trace. Military reports came in. Bahamut had smashed right through the city walls amid the chaos. Witnesses swore they saw a human silhouette clinging to the dragon's back as it dove down into the capital. Even though rumors tore through the crowd fast, nobody could lay hands on the truth, so the whole event stayed locked in mystery. After the Bahamut incident, whispers tore through the Elven Kingdom. Everyone was buzzing about how the princess finally made it back safely. And right in the middle of all that hope, rumors latched onto Fildo, insisting he might be the one behind it all, and that he could even be a royal candidate. Soft whispers swirled through the palace halls as a lone figure strolled in with eerie calm, instantly drawing every court attendant's eyes. Smiles snapped back onto the court as the princess and the king finally made peace, and her return sent instant relief flooding through the servants. In a hushed chamber, a figure pored over ancient scrolls while tea arrived like clockwork, delivered with polished, practiced grace. Fildo sat there calm as ever, flipping through his book, then taking the tea with a quiet grin, like he'd finally found his place. He got a cup of tea brewed from herbs grown at the roots of a manatee, stuff that's famous for blasting physical recovery back into full swing. He took a sip and tasted a faint sweetness. Then the elf leaned in and explained how the same flavor could swing with the way it was prepared, right as his eyes snagged on the book sitting beside him. Curiosity sparked, he snatched the book up, and there it was, an elvish script total mystery to him. The attendant leaned in and told him it was an ancient tale his mother once read. The elf's face flushed instantly, and he froze, not knowing what to say to that crushing, awkward silence. Quietly, Fildo slowed his breath and let the thoughts hit hard. Old travel memories and elven tales swirled through his mind like fireflies in the dark. Vildasat swallowed the silence as the elf stalled, trying to ask about his days in the guild. because he had never once let those memories out. Elf tried to blurt out her story, but fear swallowed her words. She quickly backed off, insisting her own tale didn't matter. A storm of thoughts swirled through both of their heads. Fildo stayed silent, while she stared into the past, clinging to that advice about hidden pain and perfect timing. When Fildo brought up his first sword, the elf's eyes went sharp, because it was a guild-issued blade used to spot brand-new adventurers. She leaned in and said, "It runs deeper. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a regulated one, stamped to shut down any sneaky scouting from rival guilds." Lunasis froze in confusion when she realized Fildo might not have been truly exiled at all, just quietly expected to come back one day. While Fildo reeled from the guild's blunder, Lunasis finally confessed her real goals and showed how Rush's choices steered every step of their journey. He dropped his eyes and whispered her name under his breath, and the tension in the room only thickened. Fildo gritted his teeth and made his move. He vowed to march straight for the silver blade, haunted by the feeling that there was still more he could have done. Even with gratitude in his chest, he flat-out told her that Lunas had done her job, and that she must stop following him from that point on. Lunasis swallowed his emotions and agreed to end their journey, even though Fildo demanded one last question first. Fildo snapped to attention at her calm answer, and then they grilled him. Did this decision really come straight from his heart? Then she pressed him. Was his choice pure will, or was he just carrying the weight of his power? Just as he opened his mouth, she pushed again. Did he really want someone else to shoulder that weight? Flustered, Fildo lunged to respond, but Luna snapped things into place. She wasn't blaming him, she was just watching him fight to say what he truly felt. Loonies gently nudged Fildo, reminding him of the words he'd promised earlier. "I want to live free, even if it means breaking free from his own power." As she slid beside him, she urged him, "If you still feel unsure about your path, lean on others." With a warm smile, she reminded him she was still the senior in this adventure, right when a sudden knock at the door shattered the moment. Elven attendants bowed low and invited Fildo to meet a royal presence. Then the air turned tense like a storm was about to break. Then the attendants couldn't stop giggling, misunderstandings snowballed fast, and Fildo panicked, scrambling to explain himself. The maids blurted out that the king summoned everyone, and it sent a jolt through the whole palace. Rose looked shocked, then fired off a heartfelt thanks for the princess's growth, even as she sprinted to get her duties done, while Fildo and Lunasis were just as stunned in the chaos. Even though Lunasis begged to go with him, the attendants pushed her to rest, and she nodded quietly, watching Fildo linger with one last look as he headed off to answer the summons. Fildo tiptoed through the grand halls, edging toward the king's chamber, forcing himself to stay perfectly calm before royalty. The moment he arrived, they formally introduced him, and just as he took a step, the door creaked open, tension snapping tight in the air. Inside, everything was already in motion. Attendants in full uniform snapped to attention, greeted him with sharp focus, and told him they'd been waiting the whole time because they were ready to start. The Elven King ordered Fildo to strip, and confusion hit him like a punch. He froze, cheeks burning as the attendants leaned in with glittering, hungry eyes. After he finally obeyed, he uncovered the mysterious marks stamped across his shoulder, and the king leaned in, staring at the patterns so intently they felt like a secret waiting to explode. As the markings sharpened into view, the king snapped into action, raising his arm to unleash a brutal spell. Runes spiraled and danced across his skin like they were alive. He stared at the curse-like magic eating through Fildo's body, and even after all his years of experience, this kind of spell still left him completely baffled. Even though the outbreak got paused, the king finally admitted the curse needed more time to crack. Then he warned Fildo to grab protective gear if the symptoms started getting worse. The king went on a non-stop rant about mind-bending magic theory, drowning Fildo in a flood of dense information. As Fildo adjusted his clothes, the talk shifted to mana distribution. Because sure, getting power back is easy, but picturing and reshuffling it. Even the king struggled with that. Fildo thought back to the staggering experience he scored from Bahamut, and how his power multiplied it into insane numbers. Then the buildup surged out of control. With nowhere safer to hide his power, he went straight to the elves, asking them to dig into the arm's strange, mysterious condition. Then a shadowy presence surged in, and a voice snapped that with power like that, Fildo had to be doing it for help, or was he secretly hunting revenge instead? Fildo stood there with steel in his spine, saying, clear as day, he wanted no revenge, calm on the surface but unshakably firm. The Elf King sat in silence, but the words hit hard. Handing a sword this powerful to a human wasn't just a gesture, it was a blazing sign of deep trust, and he was determined to honor it. Fildo threw himself into full trust in the elves, handing over his hard-earned experience points and betting they'd spend them smart. Then the king, touched by his sincerity, took his hand and agreed. The moment their palms collided, a blinding light exploded through the room, like the universe itself was sealing a pact they'd both just sworn to share. That sudden glow jolted everyone, so an attendant scrambled over and blurted that it was just a magical necklace doing its thing. Suspicion sparked the moment Fildo sensed something off. He caught those tiny movements, and suddenly he couldn't stop asking why nobody reacted earlier. His mind raced, and then it clicked. The untouched food from earlier came back to him, and cold sweat broke out as dread flooded his chest. Elsewhere, the warriors traded theories over the offerings, because what people put on the table always hinted at the crown's real play, and when a matter was truly national, even the tiniest tactics got weaponized. Lunasis, cheeks blazing and gasping, tripped over her own excuses, then carefully let slip that she felt responsible, nudging at the truth. A bond was blooming between them. Fildo panicked, shot out a quick excuse, and sprinted out of the room, leaving everyone staring in shock while he yelled that he'd be back soon. The king sensed something was terribly wrong and snapped out orders as Fildo suddenly bolted from the hall. Right before he could slip away, a bunch of elves lunged mid-leap and yanked him back, desperate to stop him. As Fildo blurted in pure confusion, the king stayed cool and crowned him an honored groom, promising he'd be welcomed with nothing but care. Fildo sprints through the corridor, and behind him a wall of blinding light detonates, screaming echoes bouncing off the walls as pure terror clenches his face. Danger is about to strike. Suddenly he slips on the floor, his balance goes flying, his eyes snap wide as he throws out his arms. Then he slams down hard, right on the next beat. When the dust finally settles, he's sprawled on the floor. Then a wave of squealing elf girls barrels in, eyes sparkling with hearts. Panic slams in as a swarm of hands lunges for him. He jerks to escape, but the sudden spotlight crushes him under the pressure. Elsewhere, an elf just sits there, sipping from a cup like nothing's happening, totally untouched by the chaos erupting all around. Caught in a wild, chaotic storm, Fildo gets slammed by the sea of grabbing hands. Panic rips through his face as he chokes and gasps for air. Royal voices ring in his ears, whispers of royalty, duty, and prophecy, while his body gets yanked through a crowd that's starting to unravel fast. Out of nowhere, blazing beams of magical force ripped across the hallway, scattering the crowd and slamming the pursuit to a sudden halt. Seizing the opening, Fildo bolts with a bunch of others, sprinting forward as chaos detonates and rages behind them. One wrong step whips him around in midair, and he freezes in shock, seconds away from slamming into the ground and tumbling straight back into chaos. As Fildo tears through the corridor, he whips into a sharp turn while the chase barrels after him. Then one pursuer spots him, and his face snaps into wild, thrilled fury. He drops down, then a whole new hall stretches out, and everyone else searches with worried confusion, not sure he ever made it through. The moment doubt creeps in, the group fractures and splits apart. Close by, Fildo darts up a ladder to dodge detection, while another elf edges in, scanning the area with sharp, watchful eyes. They scramble up to higher ground, tucked away behind all those structures, and the elf leans out from the edge to peek, while Fildo keeps a razor-sharp, tense stare locked on her. Breathing hard, they stop just long enough to steady themselves, and then it hits. He forgot something vital back there. No way to turn around now. The elf snatched Fildo with pure frustration and started yelling, but Fildo shot back fast, insisting he'd got nothing from the king. Fildo tried to brush it off, wiped his face, and blurted out a nervous answer. Yet the elf didn't buy a word, grilling him about what he'd really seen before. Fildo leaned in and told him. Back then his meals were nothing but soup and bread. So when the elf heard that, he stared in shock, amazed he'd lived that long on such a meager diet. He got bought by a new guild, got trained under a guy named Claude, and then, boom, the whole guild folded. Eventually, he slipped into a brand new party, and once that unique ability flared to life, his whole road swung toward the top guilds. 3 folks stand shoulder to shoulder before a guild recruiter, hanging on every word he spits out, saying their guild, right now, isn't much different from any other that's just starting to rise. Confusion hits the group like a wave, so they start firing back, wondering why anyone would even approach them, and they lay it out. Their weakness, their slipping condition, and the fact they've already been shut down before. Even with doubt hanging over him, the man swears that experience is everything, and he's certain there's still real potential here, begging to be explored. The recruiter leans in and offers them a spot in his guild, then casually unveils tasks he's been readying just for them. Soon the whole crew locks in for their very first battle. Without hesitation, they surge into action and smash the incoming threat. The party surges into battle, The knight slams up his guard to stop the enemy's strike, and the priest starts channeling magic from the back to back him up. Yelling at Fildo, the priest demands he back away from the danger zone. Fildo hesitates, then finally obeys. As the enemy starts to crumble under the pressure, the group realizes something. This time they're hitting harder, moving cleaner, and their teamwork finally feels razor smooth. Right as Fildo catches his breath, system notifications start blasting him non-stop. His hidden support skill is powering everyone's levels up at breakneck speed. Later, their leader cheers at the results, then pushes the idea hard, making the team's role official with a proper, formal contract. Fildo daydreams about the secret elven land. An old tale says it used to be tied to the world tree, and the idea hits him so hard it nearly knocks the breath out of him. Fueled by the way his power kept surging, his companions push the idea of even wilder adventures. Together, someday, and every day they're proving their bond is getting unbreakable. An old veteran hoists Fildo up in front of everyone, praises booming as he swears they'll hunt dragons the second Fildo's ready, and the whole guild erupts in laughter, riding high on pure excitement. Clutching a permit in his hand, he fires himself up for a trip he's been craving for ages. He's set on seeing those legends with his own eyes. When he hits level 20, he bolts straight off to spread the news, fueled by pure motivation and the trust of everyone who believes in him. Fildo reunites with his companion, who blurts out that a fresh monster subjugation job just landed. Right there, ranked a little higher than they can handle. Fildo's promotion lights up the whole team. Now he's cleared for long-distance missions, and that win sends everyone's spirits soaring high. Even with a little nerves still buzzing in the air, they snap back into gear fast, shoulders squared, hearts steady, and team up instantly, ready to launch into their next journey. Before they leave, the leader fires off his final orders. Then, as the door shuts and the group vanishes, he can only bite back his silence and pray they come back safe. All alone with his thoughts, he realized the only thing he ever wanted was to keep every single one of them alive. Then Fildo snaps his gaze forward, utterly stunned when the unexpected strikes. His eyes bulge wide as the screen around him starts to warp and twist. His party surges up a whole bunch of levels, and every single one of them gets stronger in a rush, while he just stands there watching in silence, unsure what to do next. When his own status pops up, it screams that he's fallen all the way back to level 1, so the others stare in shock, then switch to full-on disappointment, convinced he'd been lying about how far he'd come. Even after that brutal setback, the whole group makes it back home safe and sound, while their friends rush in, stunned and breathing out massive relief. A bandaged teammate, still smiling, walks up and greets Fildo warmly. She's shocked at first, but Fildo's instantly comforted by that gentle reaction. The guildmaster yanks Fildo into a private chat, chewing him out for handing out experience points without permission, and warning that one reckless move like this could wreck the party balance. Then he breaks down why experience sharing has to be handled the right way, and he steps up, taking full control of where that power goes from now on. When Fildo gets reassigned to a new group, the reactions explode. Some people welcome him with open arms, while others grumble, complain, and even mock him. The guildmaster declares that all leftover mission EXP will now rocket straight into the core team. He insists it's way smarter to train proven fighters and skip the loan, especially since Fildo is an experienced orphan who doesn't need the gamble. Fildo gets called out and blasted for putting himself first, and the insult hits so hard it freezes him in total silence. Outside, whispers roar louder as other adventurers snicker and act like they're jealous, but it's clear they're straight up mocking his fast leveling and his mess of a situation. As he sprints through the streets, strangers still cast judgment his way, and the rumor mill keeps screaming that he's stuck on level 1, frozen, unable to grow. Those old tormentors cackle again, convinced he'll never break free of the cycle, so he dodges every confrontation and slips upstairs alone in silence. He drops onto his bed, eyes locked on the ceiling, and can't stop wondering, will this miserable life ever actually change? Fildo crumpled onto the bed, swallowing his rage as the insults about him being an uneducated orphan kept hammering into him. As he vented, strange letters started popping up on his interface, so he froze, leaned in, and tried to read them before his confusion swallowed him. A brand new skill called Recovery flickered into view, and he just froze, staring at it like it had an answer he couldn't read yet, but his senses were wide awake.